This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I arrived at the house late in the afternoon. The drive had taken longer than I planned, and my shoulders felt tight. The landlord had left the key inside a small lockbox next to the front door. I entered and found the place quiet and clean. I took a look around the rooms, checked the kitchen appliances, and tested the shower water. Everything worked fine. The living room had a long sofa, a low coffee table, and a large window facing a small garden. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs, each with its own bathroom. I chose the one at the end of the hall because it had a slightly larger bed and a small balcony. I placed my bag on a chair, took out my phone, and tried to connect to the Wi-Fi. It worked without a problem. The silence felt pleasant. I could hear some distant birds outside and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I noticed there were several clocks around the house. There was one on the kitchen wall, one near the TV, and one on a shelf by the stairs. Each clock looked different. One had a black frame and white numbers. Another had a wooden rim and golden hands. A small one on a mantel in the living room had a glass dome over its face. All of them showed the same time, accurate to the minute. I stepped outside for a moment to look at the garden. The air was cool. I spotted a few insects flying around some flowers. Everything felt calm. I planned to spend a few days here alone, reading and resting. I went back inside and decided to heat some water for tea. While I waited, I looked at the clocks again. I had a habit of checking the time often. I noticed that about an hour had passed since I arrived. To my surprise, each clock seemed to be running slightly fast now. I checked my phone's time and found about a 1-minute discrepancy. It felt strange. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I made a mistake. That evening, I ate some bread and cheese for dinner and flipped through a few channels on the TV. I kept noticing the clocks. I realized that each hour, they seemed to gain a minute on my phone's time. After a few hours, they were about 3 minutes ahead. I tried to adjust one in the living room, but I could not find a way to open the glass dome. The backside was locked somehow. I decided it was not worth worrying about. I assumed they were old clocks and not perfectly accurate. I went to bed early, feeling tired from the drive. I turned off the lights and climbed under the blankets. The bed felt comfortable, and the room was quiet. At least it was quiet at first. Sometime during the night I woke up because of a steady ticking sound. It sounded like a large clock ticking just behind the wall near my bed. I sat up and listened. The sound was clear, steady, and loud enough to bother me. There were no clocks in my bedroom, though. I checked the time on my phone, 3:14 a.m. I got up and pressed my ear against the wall. The ticking continued, rhythmic and constant. I walked out into the hallway. The ticking seemed to fade. I went back into my room. There it was again, inside the walls. I did not know what to do. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but the sound made my heart beat faster. It was not a soothing sound. It reminded me that something was off about this place. Eventually, I put a pillow over my head and managed to fall asleep again out of sheer exhaustion. In the morning, I woke up feeling uneasy. I got dressed and went downstairs. The clocks were still ahead. Now they were about 5 minutes fast. I checked my phone time again and confirmed it. I stared at one clock and watched its second hand move. It looked normal. When the hour changed, I saw the minute hand jump slightly more than it should. It was subtle but clear. I could not explain it. I decided to call the landlord. He answered on the second ring. I told him about the clocks gaining time. He sounded calm and a bit amused. He said something like, "They've always been like that," and insisted it was nothing to worry about. I mentioned the ticking in the walls, and he just said he had never had a complaint about noise before. He acted as if everything was perfectly normal. I ate a quick breakfast and tried to focus on reading a book I had brought. I kept getting distracted by small sounds. I heard faint ticking noises in different parts of the house. Sometimes it came from behind a cabinet, sometimes behind a closed door. When I walked toward the sound, it would stop. I tried turning on some music to mask it, but the noise persisted in my mind. Later that afternoon, I decided to go for a walk. I locked the door and strolled around the neighborhood. It was a quiet residential area near some trees and a small pond. I cleared my head and tried to forget about the clocks. After about an hour, I returned. As soon as I stepped inside, I saw a new clock sitting on the coffee table. It was not there before I left. This one was small and had a digital display. It showed a time that matched the other clocks, now about 8 minutes fast. I had not left the door unlocked, and I was sure I had checked the table before. I picked up the new clock. It felt warm in my hand. I looked around the house for any sign of someone entering. All the windows were locked. There were no muddy footprints or misplaced items, other than this clock. I tried to open the battery compartment. It was sealed. No screws, no clips. It was like a solid piece of plastic, closed tight. I put the clock back down and called the landlord again. He insisted that I was mistaken. He said no one had visited and that maybe I brought the clock with me. I knew I had not. I felt my breathing get shallow. I decided not to argue. Instead, I told him I would check out early if this continued. He said it was my choice. That night, I found another clock. This one appeared in my bedroom on the nightstand. It was old, with a brass frame and faded numbers. It showed a time that was now about 10 minutes fast compared to my phone. I tried to ignore it, but I noticed something else. The number of years I had lived, my current age, was etched into the brass at the bottom. It was small but clear, like a subtle engraving. I stared at it. My age is not a round number that would appear by chance. It matched exactly. I turned the clock over. No screws, no way to open it. I placed it on the floor and covered it with a towel. I climbed into bed and tried not to think about it. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. The ticking had returned, louder than before. I stood up and turned on the light. The towel was still there, but I could hear ticking coming from under it. I lifted it, and the clock's hands were spinning faster than they should. The second hand moved in a steady circle, but I swore it gained an extra second every time it reached 12. I put the towel back and left the room. I went to the living room and turned on the TV to distract myself. The next morning I decided to pack my things. I wanted to leave. I could not relax here. I felt tired and jumpy. I went upstairs to grab my bag. I looked at my phone to check the time. It showed 9:20 a.m. The clocks in the house showed 9:31 a.m., 11 minutes ahead now. I thought I should leave immediately. I grabbed my bag and headed to the door. When I tried to open it, the doorknob felt stuck. I twisted it harder. The door opened, but when I stepped outside, it felt like I had walked into a heavy, humid air. I looked at the street. It seemed normal at first, but when I tried to check my phone for directions, it showed no signal. I walked down the driveway. I stopped when I realized I could not hear the usual sounds of the neighborhood. No cars, no birds, nothing. I turned around and looked at the house. The windows looked dark. I felt a shiver in my back. I walked back to the door and entered again. The clocks were ticking loudly now. I could hear them from every corner. I tried to call the landlord, but my phone showed no service. The Wi-Fi was gone too. I tried to turn on the TV, but it just showed static. I went to the kitchen and looked at the clock there. The hour hand was moving in a strange way, not smoothly, but in tiny jumps. I checked another clock. The same thing. They were all off, each gaining time at a strange rate. I tried to think clearly. I would pack my car and drive away. I went outside to my car. I turned the ignition. The engine cranked but would not start. I tried several times. No luck. I got out and opened the hood. Everything looked fine, but I am not a mechanic. I walked to the front gate. It was closed. I pulled it, pushed it, but it felt heavier than before. I felt sweat on my forehead. I had no choice but to return inside and wait for someone to come by. I checked the fridge for food. Everything was where I left it. I ate some crackers and drank some water. I tried to calm down. I listened for the ticking. It was still there. I followed it to a corner of the living room. It sounded like it came from inside the wall. I pressed my hand against the paint. I felt a faint vibration, like a tiny mechanism turning inside. Hours passed. I tried to keep track of time using my phone, but the battery drained faster than normal, even though it showed no background apps. Eventually, it died completely. The clocks in the house now all showed times that made no sense. Some were hours ahead, others were minutes behind. They began to differ from each other. I watched one clock's hands move backward for a few seconds, then forward again. I took one clock and tried smashing it against the floor. It did not break. I tried again, harder. It would not crack. Its ticking continued. Muffled by the towel, I tried wrapping around it. Night fell. I lit a few candles I found in a drawer. The electricity still worked, but I did not trust the lights. They flickered sometimes. I heard a new sound, a faint scratching against the walls. I followed it upstairs. In the hallway, I saw a shadow moving. I turned on the light. There was nothing there, just the empty hallway. The door to my bedroom was closed. I remember leaving it open. I put my hand on the doorknob and opened it slowly. The bed was as I left it. The clock on the nightstand was gone. Instead, I saw a different one on the windowsill. This one had no numbers, just blank spaces where numbers should be. Its hands were spinning wildly. I backed out of the room and closed the door. I felt my chest tighten. I realized I did not know how long I had been in this house. It felt like days, but maybe it was just hours. I went downstairs and looked out the window. The street looked distorted somehow, like I was viewing it through a thick sheet of glass. I tried opening the window. It would not budge. I took a chair and tried to break the glass. The chair bounced off, and I dropped it when a shock traveled up my arms. I shouted for help. Nobody answered. I stood in the kitchen, breathing heavily, feeling sweat on my neck. The ticking grew louder. I checked a drawer and found a small tool kit. I tried to pry open one of the clocks with a screwdriver. The metal bent the screwdriver's tip. I tried a knife. The blade chipped. The clock's surface felt like metal but acted harder than steel. I sat on the floor. I felt exhausted. My stomach growled. I ate some nuts and dried fruit I found in a cupboard. I drank more water. I tried to sleep on the sofa, hoping that morning would bring something different. I drifted in and out of light sleep. At some point, I heard a loud click. I opened my eyes. One of the clocks on the wall started moving its hands backward, counting down from a random time. The other clocks followed. Each displayed a different countdown, all of them ticking down to something. I did not know what. I stood up and looked at them. One showed 10 minutes left, another showed 2 hours, another showed 30 seconds. They were not in sync. One by one, they reached 0. When they did, their ticking stopped. Soon, the house fell silent, except for one last clock that had appeared in front of the door. I had not seen it before. It was large and blocked my exit. I pushed it, trying to move it aside, but it would not shift. Its countdown reached 0, and I heard a creaking sound inside the walls. I turned around, and all the clocks that had stopped began to melt. They did not melt like wax, but their faces warped and their hands drooped. I could see them losing shape. I smelled something like burned plastic and paint. The wall paint began to bubble. I touched it. It was warm and soft. The ticking returned, softer now, like a distant heartbeat. I felt dizzy. I tried once more to open the front door. My hand passed through the knob as if it were made of smoke. I felt cold air on my fingers. I pulled my hand back and looked at it. My hand looked normal, but I was shaking. I backed away from the door and stumbled into the living room. The furniture looked faded. The walls looked darker. I checked the kitchen. The cabinets seemed slightly transparent. I could see shapes behind them that should not be there. The clocks were gone, replaced by faint outlines in the air, like after-images burned into my vision. I no longer heard birds outside. I no longer felt the floor firmly under my feet. When I tried to sit, my body felt lighter. I tried to speak my own name out loud, and my voice came out flat and distant. I went upstairs. The bedroom door was open now. The bed was gone. I saw nothing but a blank room with faint shadows where furniture used to be. I stepped in and reached for the balcony door. I touched the glass and felt nothing. I stepped forward, expecting to hit the door, but I passed through it and found myself outside on the balcony. The sky looked white and empty. No sun, no clouds. My heart pounded. My throat felt dry. I could not explain what was happening. I turned around to go back inside. The house was fading. Its shape was still there, but its colors and textures were gone. I reached for the balcony railing. My hand passed through it. I felt a cold sensation, like a breeze on my skin. Then I noticed my watch on my wrist. It still showed a time, frozen at the moment I arrived yesterday. I tapped it. The second hand did not move. I tried to remove it, but my fingers passed through the strap. I stood there, not knowing what else to do. I tried to breathe slowly. My breathing sounded hollow in my ears. The house vanished before my eyes, leaving me in an empty space. I saw no path, no street, no garden. I heard no ticking, no clocks, just silence. I tried to walk, but I could not feel any ground. I felt weightless and trapped at the same time. Without any sense of time, I could not tell how long I stayed like that. My stomach hurt from hunger, but I had no food. My throat burned, but I had no water. I began to feel my body weaken. My eyelids grew heavy. I knelt, or tried to. I could not feel my knees. I closed my eyes and listened. Nothing. I opened my eyes again. Only emptiness. I do not know how long I waited. Maybe I am still there. Remember the day I first saw the mirror in the hallway. It was a Tuesday late afternoon, and I had just arrived home from work. My apartment building had a narrow corridor with a single elevator and plain off-white walls. Usually, there was nothing in front of the elevator doors except a small rug. On that day, someone had placed a tall, old mirror there. The mirror leaned against the wall, facing the elevator. It had a heavy wooden frame with faded varnish. The glass looked clean, but slightly tinted. I stopped for a moment, curious, wondering who put it there. I took a step closer and looked at my reflection. The first thing I noticed was that it looked normal, just me staring back. I adjusted my tie and straightened my posture. Then I pressed the elevator button. As I waited, I checked the mirror again. I noticed a slight delay in my reflection's movements. When I tilted my head, my reflection seemed to tilt its head a fraction of a second later. It was subtle, but I felt a small, sharp discomfort in my chest. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light or my tired eyes. The elevator arrived. I got in, pressed my floor number, and saw my reflection in the mirror as the doors closed. For a moment, I swore my reflection did not follow me into the elevator, like it stayed outside. But the doors closed too fast, and I dismissed the thought. In my apartment, I forgot about it. I ate a quick dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed. The next morning, on my way out, I saw the mirror again. It was still there, in the same place, leaning quietly. I passed by it and tried not to stare. I could not resist a quick glance. This time, when I looked, I saw something strange. Behind me, in the reflection, I thought I saw a shape. It looked like a person standing far behind me, at the opposite end of the corridor. But when I turned around, nobody was there. I checked the reflection again. It was just me. Maybe it was a shadow from the lights. I was in a hurry, so I left without giving it more thought. Over the next few days, I avoided looking directly at the mirror. I felt a tightness in my stomach whenever I approached it. But curiosity got the better of me. One evening, I came home late. The corridor was quiet, and most neighbors' lights were off. The elevator's old motor made a humming noise as it delivered me to my floor. When I stepped out, I saw the mirror and decided to examine it more carefully. I walked up to it, keeping my eyes on my reflection. For the first few seconds, everything seemed normal. Then I raised my hand as if to wave to myself. My reflection hesitated. It raised its hand a moment after mine, as though unsure. This was not a trick of light. I felt my heart rate increase. I waved again. The reflection followed, delayed by half a second. I took a step back, breathing faster. I reached out with one finger to touch the mirror. The glass felt cold and solid. I pulled my hand away and hurried to my apartment. I tried to calm down. I told myself it must be something about my eyes, the angle, or the lighting. The next day, I decided not to look at the mirror at all. I came home and stared at the floor as I passed it. I did this for 2 days. On the third day, I caught a glimpse of my reflection out of the corner of my eye. I saw my reflection move when I did not move. I snapped my head up, but everything looked normal again. I felt a chill all over my body. I rubbed my arms and stood there, unsure if I should call the building manager or just ignore it. I ended up doing nothing. I went to my apartment, locked the door, and tried to sleep. That night, I had trouble resting. Around 3 a.m, I got up to get a glass of water. My apartment had a small hallway with a mirror in the bathroom and another above a dresser in my bedroom. I passed by the bathroom and glanced at the mirror inside. My reflection was there, normal. I took my water and returned to bed. While lying down, I faced the dresser mirror on the opposite wall. In the dim light, I could see my outline. I swear I saw a slight movement in the mirror that did not match my own. I sat up straight and turned on the bedside lamp. In the light, my reflection looked normal. I turned off the lamp and watched again. After a few moments, I noticed a slow, subtle movement in the mirror that seemed out of sync with me. It was like someone imitating my posture but lagging behind. I felt my heart pounding in my throat. I got up, approached the dresser mirror, and tried to see if there was something behind me. Nothing. I touched my face, moved my head side to side, and watched carefully. After a while, I decided I was too tired to trust my senses. I went back to bed, but I slept poorly. The next morning, I left early. I did not want to be alone in my apartment. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed the large mirror by the elevator was gone. In its place, the wall was empty and bare. I felt relieved. Maybe the landlord moved it away. Maybe someone took it. I got to work feeling slightly better. But in the afternoon, when I returned, I found the same mirror now standing right outside my apartment door. It was leaning against the wall, facing my door directly. I stopped short and felt sweat on my forehead. My mouth felt dry. I looked up and down the corridor. No one else was around. Who had moved it here? I approached it slowly. I stood a few feet away and looked at my reflection. At first, I saw only myself, tired eyes, tense shoulders. Then my reflection smiled. I did not smile. I froze. My scalp tingled, and I felt my hands tremble. I took a step back. My reflection's face returned to neutral. I took a deep breath, reached out, and tried to turn the mirror around so it would face the wall. The mirror felt heavier than it looked. I could not budge it. My reflection watched calmly. I pulled harder, leaning my body into it. The mirror did not move. I felt my arms strain. I gave up and let go. I took my keys, turned my back to the mirror, and opened my door. As I entered, I imagined my reflection still standing there, staring at my back. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Inside my apartment, I tried to calm down. I drank a glass of water, paced around the living room, and tried to decide what to do. Call the landlord, call a neighbor, tell them what? That my mirror reflection was acting weird? I laughed nervously. It sounded hollow. I turned on the TV and tried to distract myself. After a few hours, I decided to cover the mirrors inside my apartment. I took some old sheets and covered the bathroom mirror and the dresser mirror. I did not want to see my reflection anymore. As I was pinning the sheet over the dresser mirror, I heard a whisper. It came from behind me. I spun around. No one was there. The whisper repeated, but quieter, like someone calling my name in a muffled voice. It seemed to come from the covered mirror. I held my breath and slowly lifted a corner of the sheet. My reflection was there, face partially obscured. For a moment, I swore I saw its lips move, forming my name. I dropped the sheet and stepped back. I left the bedroom and closed the door. I tried to sleep on the couch that night. I woke up several times, thinking I heard soft knocking from inside the walls. The next morning, I checked the hallway. The large mirror was still there, in front of my door. I opened my door slowly and stepped into the corridor. My reflection waited inside that mirror, staring. I walked past it, ignoring it, refusing to look. As I approached the elevator, I felt a presence behind me. I turned around. The reflection in the large mirror at my door raised its hand, even though I was too far away to see my own face in it now. I ran for the elevator. I hammered the button until it arrived. At work, I could not focus. I felt like something was watching me. I checked my phone's camera, using it as a makeshift mirror to see my face. It looked normal. When I returned home that evening, I braced myself before stepping onto my floor. The mirror remained there. This time, I approached it and spoke out loud. I asked if anyone was there, if someone was playing a prank. My voice sounded shaky. The reflection just stood still. I went inside my apartment. I decided to remove the mirrors from my place. I tried to lift the dresser mirror, but it was screwed to the wall. I removed the screws and placed the mirror on the floor, facing down. I did the same with the bathroom mirror, taking it off its hook and placing it face down in the bathtub. Now, no reflections. I felt slightly better, but at night I heard a tapping sound. It came from the dresser mirror lying face down on the floor. Soft taps, irregular, as if someone's fingernail was scratching the back of the mirror. I knelt beside it and listened. My breathing was shallow. I lifted it a bit, just a crack, to peek underneath. I saw darkness, no reflection. I lowered it again, and the tapping stopped. I tried to sleep. I drifted off at dawn. When I woke up, I found the bathroom mirror no longer face down. It was now leaning against the wall, facing me as I stood in the doorway. I had locked my apartment door, so no one else could have come in. I approached the bathroom mirror cautiously. My reflection looked back at me, but now its eyes seemed darker, its skin paler. I raised my hand. It followed with a delay. I opened my mouth and said nothing, just breathed. My reflection's lips parted a moment after mine. I felt nauseous. I took a towel and threw it over the bathroom mirror. Then I dragged it into the living room and placed it behind the sofa, covered. I returned to the bathroom and closed the door. I felt a small measure of relief, but not much. Later, I tried to contact the landlord and ask about the mirror in the hallway. He said he knew nothing about it. He sounded annoyed and told me not to bring my personal items into the corridor. I explained that it was not mine. He insisted he had no idea who put it there. I asked other neighbors. They either did not know or did not care. Some said they never noticed a mirror at all. I realized I could not recall when the mirror first appeared. I remembered it was a Tuesday, but I did not remember seeing anyone carrying it in. I tried to recall the day before, and my memory felt hazy. My head ached when I tried to think too hard about it. That evening, I returned and found no large mirror in the hallway. I felt a surge of relief. But as I approached my apartment, I saw something under my door. It looked like a shard of glass. I picked it up carefully and realized it was part of a mirror's frame, a small wooden chip with flaked varnish. I dropped it and stepped back. My heart raced. I unlocked my door and went inside. The towel covering the bathroom mirror was gone. The mirror lay on the floor, face up. My reflection smiled at me. I backed away, feeling my muscles tense and my stomach churn. I grabbed a hammer from my kitchen drawer and tried to smash the mirror. I swung hard, expecting the glass to shatter. The hammer bounced off with a dull thud. I tried again, hitting harder. The mirror remained intact. My reflection watched, amused. I felt tears at the corners of my eyes. I was panting, confused, and angry. I picked up the mirror and threw it against the wall. Nothing. Not a crack. I carried it back into the bathroom and leaned it against the wall again. I covered it with a heavy blanket. I heard a muffled whisper from beneath the blanket. I yanked the bathroom door shut and locked it, even though it made no sense to lock a door against a mirror. I paced around the living room, trying to think. I had no idea what to do. I felt watched every second. My own apartment felt hostile. I took my phone and tried to record a video of the mirror. When I watched the recording, the mirror looked normal. My reflection moved normally, no delays, no strange smiles. I tried multiple times. Each time, the playback looked ordinary. I cursed under my breath and rubbed my eyes. That night, I slept on the floor of my bedroom, with the dresser mirror still face down. I woke up several times, hearing faint whispers that sounded like my voice but distorted. I stayed still, sweating, gripping a heavy book as my only weapon. The whispers faded near dawn. In the morning, I decided to leave the apartment. I packed a small bag and walked out. The hallway was empty, no mirror. The elevator doors opened, and I got in. On the ground floor, I spoke to the doorman and asked if he had seen anyone moving a mirror. He said no, looking confused. I stepped outside into the street. It was a bright day, people walking around, cars passing by. I felt safe for a moment. I checked my reflection in a store window. It looked normal. I waved at myself. The reflection followed perfectly. I almost laughed with relief. I decided to visit a friend's place and spend the night there. As I walked, I passed by several glass surfaces and took quick glances to reassure myself. Everything seemed fine, but as the sun began to set, I caught my reflection in a car's side mirror. For a fraction of a second, I saw it lag, like before. My heart sank. I walked faster, avoiding all reflective surfaces. I reached my friend's building and got inside. In the lobby, there was a large decorative mirror. I had to pass it to reach the elevators. I kept my eyes straight ahead, not looking at it. I felt my skin prickle. I felt something watching. Inside my friend's apartment, I asked him if I could cover his mirrors. He looked at me strangely, but I insisted. He helped me cover every mirror. No reflections. I slept on his couch, but I did not rest well. I dreamed of my reflection tapping on the mirror's surface, calling my name in my own voice. In the morning, when I woke up, my friend said he heard whispering at night. He said it sounded like me talking in another room, but I never left the couch. I knew then that I could not run from it. The reflection would follow me anywhere. I left my friend's apartment and walked the streets, avoiding windows and mirrors. But they are everywhere, in car windows, in shop fronts, in puddles of water. Each time I glanced, I caught a slight delay, a subtle shift, a mocking smile. I kept moving, hoping to find a place with no reflections at all, but that is impossible in a city. I do not know what to do now. I keep my head down, my eyes on the ground. I try not to look at my face anywhere, but I can feel it. My reflection is waiting. It's always waiting. I remember the day I arrived at the cabin. It was late afternoon. I had driven through a dirt road and parked near a group of tall pines. The cabin looked old but well-maintained. The front door had a simple lock, and the landlord had left the key under a rock beside the step. I found it easily, opened the door, and stepped inside. The cabin had a single large room with a bed in one corner, a small kitchen area, and a table with 2 chairs near the window. A door led to a tiny bathroom with a sink, toilet, and a shower. A few shelves held plates, cups, and a kettle. On the kitchen counter, I saw an old landline phone. It had a rotary dial and a thick cord. It looked like it belonged in another decade. I shrugged. I had no cell reception out here, so maybe the landlord expected me to use this old phone if I needed help. The first night was quiet. I made some tea on the small stove and ate a sandwich I brought from home. I turned on a battery-powered radio I'd packed. It picked up only static, so I turned it off. I lit a small lamp near the bed and read a book until I got sleepy. I heard only the wind outside and the soft creaking of the wooden beams. I fell asleep easily. In the morning, I woke up early, feeling rested. I washed my face, boiled water for coffee, and sat at the table to watch the trees outside. It was calm. I planned to stay here for a few days, just to disconnect. After breakfast, I went outside for a walk. The forest smelled like damp earth and pine needles. I followed a trail behind the cabin that led to a small stream. I spent most of the day exploring. I saw a few birds and squirrels. No people, no cars. It felt peaceful. I returned to the cabin in the late afternoon. The sun was setting. I opened the door and found the interior a bit cooler. I closed the windows and lit the lamp. As I set my things down, I heard a sound. The phone rang, the old landline phone. It rang with a dull, metallic tone. I froze. I had no idea who would call this number. I picked up the receiver slowly and said hello. No answer, just silence. Then the call disconnected. The line went dead. I placed the phone back in its cradle and stood there, confused. I checked for a phone jack. I found one, but it was not connected to any visible line. Just an old wire hanging loose. The phone should not be working at all. I tried to ignore it. Maybe a glitch. Maybe some leftover charge in the phone line. I ate dinner, read my book, and eventually went to bed. Around midnight, the phone rang again. I jumped, my heart pounding. I answered it, expecting silence. This time I heard faint breathing. I said hello, but no one replied. After a few seconds, the line cut off again. I hung up and checked the connection. The phone was definitely not plugged into anything. I pulled it off the counter and examined it closely. It was just a standard old phone, dusty and heavy. No batteries, no hidden devices. That night, I slept poorly. I kept expecting the phone to ring again, but it did not. In the morning, I tried to call the landlord on my cell. No reception, of course. I walked outside, holding my phone high, but still nothing. I decided to ignore the issue. I made breakfast and went for another walk. The forest was quiet as before. I stayed out longer this time, enjoying the fresh air. When I got back in the afternoon, I opened the door and noticed something strange. The phone was off the hook. I remembered placing it back in its cradle that morning. Now the receiver lay on the counter. I picked it up, listened. No sound, no dial tone, nothing. I replaced it carefully. I checked the cabin, looking for any sign that someone had entered. Everything else looked untouched. I locked the door and tried to relax. As evening approached, I decided to keep an eye on the phone. I sat at the table, reading, but mostly watching the phone. When the sun finally set, the phone rang again. I answered immediately. Silence. Then I heard a voice, very faint. I could not make out the words. I said hello again, louder. The voice stopped. The call ended with a click. I hung up and felt sweat on my forehead. I considered leaving that night, but I was tired, and driving on that dark forest road did not appeal to me. I told myself that if it got worse, I would leave in the morning. I went to bed, keeping my flashlight nearby. At around 2 a.m, the phone rang. I grabbed the flashlight and answered. Silence at first, then a low whisper. It sounded like a single word, but I could not understand it. The line went dead again. In the morning, I woke up determined to leave. I gathered my things and loaded them into the car. Before I left, I went back inside to check if I forgot anything. That's when the phone rang in the daylight, which made it feel even stranger. I answered with my bag still over my shoulder. Silence, then a whisper. Volte para dentro. That was not English, it was Portuguese. I recognized it. It meant, go back inside. I stepped outside to see if anyone was around. I saw no one. The forest was still. The cabin's small front yard was empty. No tracks, no footprints. I walked around the cabin, checking the sides and the back. Nothing. I returned to the front door. Through the window, I saw that the light was on inside. I knew I left it off when I stepped out. My stomach tightened. I dropped my bag and entered the cabin again. The phone lay silent. The lamp above the kitchen area glowed softly. I tried the switch. It clicked, but the light stayed on. I tried another lamp. It would not turn off either. I pulled the plug from the wall socket. The light still glowed. The ceiling light did not respond to the switch. My throat felt dry. I picked up the phone receiver again and listened. No sound. I hit the cradle a few times, hoping to break any connection. Still nothing. I decided to leave anyway. I walked out, closed the door, and got into my car. I turned the key. The engine would not start. I tried again and again, pumping the gas pedal. The engine coughed once but refused to run. I popped the hood. The engine looked normal, no obvious damage. I had no mechanical skills, so I was stuck. It was still early afternoon. I thought about walking, but the landlord's place was miles away. I had no cell signal, and the nearest town was too far to reach by nightfall. I decided to wait until morning, then try walking out. I went back inside to gather more supplies. As soon as I stepped inside, I heard footsteps in the next room. But there was no next room. The cabin had only one main room and a small bathroom. The footsteps sounded like someone wearing heavy boots, pacing just beyond the bathroom door. I approached the bathroom door and listened. The footsteps stopped. I opened the door quickly. The small bathroom was empty. I checked the shower, the sink, nothing. No window large enough for anyone to escape. I backed out, closing the door. My heart was racing. I could feel sweat trickling down my spine. The phone rang again. I picked it up, not sure what to say. Before I could speak, the voice whispered again, "Volte para dentro." The call ended. I put the phone down and looked around. The phrase made no sense. I was already inside, unless it meant something else. I tried the front door again, hoping maybe it would open to something normal. When I pulled it, the door opened onto darkness. Not night sky darkness, but a black void. I slammed it shut. I looked out the window. I saw the yard and the trees, but the door did not show the same view. I felt a panic rising in my chest. I turned around and saw that the bathroom door was now slightly open. I remembered closing it. I took a step toward it, and the phone rang once more. I ignored it this time. It kept ringing, louder and shriller. I grabbed the receiver and shouted, "What do you want?" The voice was clearer now. It repeated, "Volte para dentro." I yelled that I was inside already, that I did not understand. The line went dead. I pulled the cord from the phone, yanked it out. The phone rang again anyway. I threw it across the room. It hit the wall and bounced onto the floor, still ringing. I covered my ears. The sound was inside my head. Then it stopped. I looked at the phone on the floor. Its rotary dial spun slowly, clicking. I felt like I could not breathe properly. I needed to get out. I grabbed a chair and tried to smash the window. The glass did not break. I hit it again, harder, nothing. The chair splintered. I tried the kitchen knives on the door, stabbing at the wood. The blade bent. I screamed. The voice spoke again, not through the phone this time, but from behind the bathroom door. It said, "Volte para dentro." I rushed forward and pushed the bathroom door open. The bathroom light flickered. The mirror above the sink showed my reflection. My face looked pale, eyes wide. I listened, holding my breath. No voice now, just silence. I turned off the bathroom light. It still flickered. The shower's tap dripped slowly. I could smell something damp and stale. I backed out of the bathroom and returned to the main room. Now the cabin looked different. The bed had shifted position, closer to the table. The lamp was off, but I could still see clearly. The air felt thicker. My lungs burned a bit. I tried the door again. Behind it, I saw the cabin interior repeated, like a reflection. Another version of the same room stretched before me, dimly lit. I closed the door. I opened it again. The same repeated interior appeared. I stepped through. The moment I did, I heard the phone ring once more. Inside this second cabin space, the phone sat on the kitchen counter as before. I touched it. It felt warm. I answered it. The voice said nothing this time. I listened carefully. I heard the sound of breathing, as if someone stood right behind me. I spun around. Empty room. I whispered, "Who are you?" The call ended. I tried the door again. Another layer of the cabin waited beyond. I felt disoriented, like moving through repeating rooms. Each time I opened the door, I saw the same room, slightly dimmer, the furniture slightly rearranged. Each time, the phone would ring. Each time, the voice or the silence would greet me. I lost count of how many times I passed through. The air got harder to breathe. My head pounded. In one of the layers, I noticed the phone's cord had grown longer, stretching across the floor. I picked it up carefully. It led nowhere. I tugged on it. It wouldn't come free. The phone rang while I held the cord. I answered. The voice whispered one last time, "Vol.58." I felt something behind me. I turned. The bathroom door creaked open. Darkness inside. I stepped forward, drawn by some instinct. Inside the bathroom, I saw my reflection again. This time, my reflection did not match my movements. It reached up and touched its face. I stood still. The reflection mouthed words I could not hear. I leaned closer to the mirror. My reflection's eyes widened, and its lips formed the words silently. I realized it was saying "Volte para dentro" over and over, but without sound. My head hurt. I backed away. I stumbled over the bathtub's edge and fell. The water in the tub felt ice cold. I struggled to stand up. When I looked up at the mirror again, the reflection was gone. Just an empty bathroom now. I left the bathroom. The cabin had changed again. Now it looked old and dusty. Cobwebs in the corners, paint peeling from the walls. The phone lay on the floor, covered in dust. I picked it up. No dial tone, no ringing. I placed it back on the counter. I tried the door one more time. This time, when I opened the door, I saw the original yard outside. The sun was setting, and the trees looked normal. I stepped out, feeling the cool air on my face. I turned to look at the cabin's interior through the open door. It looked normal again, just as when I arrived. The lamp worked properly. The furniture was in place. The phone sat quietly on the counter, disconnected. I slowly closed the door behind me. I walked to my car. I tried the ignition. The engine started on the first try. I pulled away, following the dirt road back to the main road. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I did not look back. I kept driving until I reached a place with cell reception. I tried calling the landlord. No answer. I never returned to the cabin. I still don't know who called me or why. I remember the voice and the strange instructions. I remember the layers of rooms, the impossible door, and the old phone that should not have worked. I remember the tension in my chest and the sweat on my forehead. I'm done with that place. I'm not going back. I moved into that house in late autumn. It was a single-story place with a small yard, a narrow driveway, and 3 windows facing the street. I picked it because it was quiet and affordable. I worked long hours at an office and came home tired. I liked the silence at night. No traffic, no loud neighbors, just the sound of the wind and sometimes distant cars. Everything felt normal for the first couple of weeks. I unpacked my boxes, arranged my furniture, and got used to the space. The bedroom window was at the front of the house, facing the street. I kept the curtains closed at night, but opened them in the morning to let in some light. The house felt comfortable enough. Then, one morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I looked at the clock on my bedside table. It was 4:37 a.m. I remember the time clearly. I heard a soft tapping sound at the window. It was gentle, like someone lightly knocking with a fingertip. I sat up, heart beating fast. I thought maybe a branch was hitting the glass, but I had no trees close enough. I turned on the bedside lamp and listened. The tapping stopped. I got out of bed and moved the curtain aside. The street was dark and empty. A single lamppost at the corner cast a weak light. No cars, no people. I checked the window frame and glass. Nothing unusual. I went back to bed, telling myself it must have been a random noise, maybe a settling of the house. I slept poorly after that, uneasy and alert. The next morning, I woke again at 4:37 a.m. This time, I woke because of the tapping. It was the same gentle knock on the glass, in the same pattern. 3 short taps, a pause, then 3 more. My mouth felt dry. I waited, holding my breath. The tapping continued for about a minute, then stopped. I looked at the window. I wanted to open it and look outside, but I felt scared. Instead, I lay still, listening. Nothing else happened that night. During the day, I tried to forget about it. I told myself it could be the wind or some animal. But no animal leaves such perfectly clean hand marks, which I noticed later. That afternoon, as I was wiping the window, I saw faint outlines of handprints. They were very clean, almost as if someone pressed a damp but spotless hand on the glass. The shape was a human hand, but the prints were so faint I could barely make them out. I rubbed them away with a cloth. I felt a knot in my stomach. I decided to set up a camera. I had an old webcam and a laptop. I placed the laptop on a chair facing the window, left it running all night, and hit record before I went to sleep. The tapping came again at 4:37 a.m., waking me from a deep sleep. I waited in bed, heart pounding. After it stopped, I got up and checked the recording. The video showed the dark window, the dim outline of my curtains, and nothing else. No sign of movement, no shapes outside. The sound on the video picked up the tapping, but there was no visible cause. I rewound and watched again. Still nothing. This pattern repeated every night for a week, always at 4:37 a.m., always the same gentle tapping. I tried leaving a light on in the room, hoping to catch a shadow. I tried a different camera angle. Nothing. The taps continued, but the recording showed no one there. I became more anxious. My sleep suffered. I started waking up before the tapping, lying in the dark, waiting for it. My heart would pound in my chest. My palms would sweat. Each time I would see nothing but feel that someone was right outside, watching me through the glass. After the tapping stopped, I would check outside, but found nothing. One morning, I decided to wait at the window. At 4:30 a.m., I stood behind the curtain looking out. My street was silent, no movement. At exactly 4:37 a.m., I heard the tapping, but I saw no one. The glass shook slightly under the knocks, but no hand, no figure. My throat went tight. I opened the window quickly and looked outside. Empty street, no footprints on the ground. I closed it again, confused and frightened. The next day, I tried something else. I placed flour on the windowsill outside, hoping to catch a footprint or some mark. The following morning after the tapping, I checked the flour. It was undisturbed, no mark at all. I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was dreaming. But I had recordings of the sound, and I was awake when it happened. A few days later, something changed. I woke up at 4:37 a.m. to find the tapping was now on the window upstairs. Except I had no upstairs. I lived in a single-story house. The sound clearly came from above my bedroom window, as if someone climbed the wall and knocked on a higher pane of glass. But there was no higher pane of glass. I rushed outside in the early morning light and looked at my roof. It was a simple pitched roof with shingles, nothing else. No one could stand up there and knock on imaginary windows. My skin crawled. I felt watched all the time. During the day, I noticed small changes in my home. Items moved slightly from where I left them. A book on my desk placed at a different angle. A cup in the sink that I swear I had left in the cupboard. Little things. I thought maybe I was careless, but after it happened several times, I suspected that whoever tapped on my window could also get inside somehow. I changed my locks. I checked all the windows and doors, sealing them, adding extra latches. I started sleeping in the living room, far from the bedroom window. It made no difference. At 4:37 a.m., tapping on a window would wake me. If I moved rooms, the tapping seemed to move as well. Sometimes it sounded like it came from the kitchen window, other times from the bathroom's small window. Each time, I would run to check, but see nothing. I set up multiple cameras around the house, pointing at every window, inside and out. I used my phone, my laptop, even bought a cheap security camera kit. No matter what angle I tried, the recordings showed no one. Just the sound of tapping, always 3 gentle knocks, a pause, and 3 more. My nerves were shot. I started drinking coffee late at night, trying to stay awake. I wanted to catch whoever was doing this. But no matter what I did, the tapping happened at the exact time, and I never saw anyone. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That someone tapped on my windows but left no trace? I doubted they would take it seriously. One night, I tried opening the window at the exact moment of tapping. I flung it open fast, shining a flashlight outside. I saw nothing. I leaned out, looked up and down. The street was empty. The neighbors' houses were dark. No cars passing by. Nothing but silence and the faint hum of distant air conditioning units. A week later, the tapping stopped. I woke up and realized it was past 4:37 a.m. and no tapping had occurred. I felt relieved. Maybe whoever it was gave up. I waited a few more days, and still nothing. I began to relax. I left the cameras up for another week, just in case, but there were no more knocks. I slept better. I started to believe it was over. Then one morning, I woke up and found my bedroom window locked from the inside. It had a latch that you operate by hand. I always left it unlocked so I could open it easily if needed. Now it was locked tight. I tried to unlatch it, but it refused to move, like it was fused. I examined it closely. It was my window, same as before, but the latch felt different, as if it had been replaced or jammed. I had to use a screwdriver to pry it open. It took several minutes. My heart sank. Someone had tampered with it from the inside, but I lived alone, and I never heard anyone come in. I checked other parts of the house. I found my living room couch moved a few inches. My kitchen chairs had been rearranged slightly. A small figurine I kept on a shelf was facing a different direction. None of these changes made sense. They were subtle, but I knew my own habits. I never left things like that. The tapping resumed the next night, but at a different window this time. It was the small bathroom window, located high on the wall. I climbed on a stool to look outside. Nothing, just darkness. I touched the glass. It felt cold and firm, but the sound continued for a few seconds, then stopped. I slid the window open and leaned out, shining a flashlight. Empty yard. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, maybe someone using a long pole or a device to knock. But how did they get to the second floor that doesn't exist? How did they reach the high bathroom window without a ladder or leaving footprints? And how did they get inside to move my stuff around without breaking in? I became jumpy. I stopped inviting friends over. I stopped cooking anything elaborate. I just ate cereal and sandwiches, spending most of my evenings checking every corner of the house. I would knock on the walls, open the closets, check under the bed. I found nothing unusual except for those slight movements of my belongings each morning. The knowledge that someone or something had access to my home without leaving a trace drove me nearly to panic. I considered leaving, selling the place, moving to a hotel, but I was invested in this home, and I had nowhere else to go immediately. I decided to confront the situation directly. One night, I sat in my living room with all the lights off. I held a heavy flashlight in my hand. I waited until 4:37 a.m. At the exact minute, the tapping started at the bedroom window. I rushed in, turned on the light, and shouted, "I know you're there!" I heard the tapping stop. For a moment, the silence was complete. Then I felt a presence behind me, as if someone stood in the hallway. I spun around. Nobody there. But I smelled something faint, like clean air, no perfume, no sweat. It was as if a person with no scent stood right beside me. I swung the flashlight through the air. Nothing. My heart pounded. I could hear my pulse in my ears. After that night, the tapping became less frequent. It skipped a day, then returned, but softer. I noticed that every time I acknowledged it, it would pause. But then, in the morning, I would find something moved in my house. A spoon on the wrong side of the sink, a lamp slightly tilted, a book taken from the shelf and placed on the table. It felt like whatever it was, it learned my routine. It knew when I slept, when I ate, when I went to work. It adjusted its behavior. After a while, the tapping stopped altogether, but the sense of being watched did not. I would come home and feel eyes on my back. I would sense movement in another room. I would find my possessions rearranged. Never stolen, never broken, just moved. I tried changing my routines. I slept in a different room, kept lights on all night, played loud music. The feeling persisted. I tried ignoring it, acting as if nothing was wrong. That made no difference. Some mornings I found the shower turned on, or the TV playing static. One time I found my car keys on the windowsill, though I remembered leaving them on the kitchen counter. I never saw anyone. I never heard footsteps or doors closing. I never found evidence like footprints or fingerprints. It was as if a ghost lived with me. But everything felt too solid, too physical for that. I could not explain it. Over time, I grew used to it. I accepted that I was not alone in my own home. Something shared the space with me, something that knew me well but chose to remain unseen. I stopped trying to fight it. I stopped moving cameras around. I stopped waking up at 4:37 a.m. to check for tapping. If it happened, I ignored it. If things moved, I put them back without comment. Life continued. I went to work, came home, watched TV. The presence remained, quiet but constant. Sometimes I woke up and felt that someone was standing by my bed, watching me sleep. I never turned on the light. I just squeezed my eyes shut and pretended I did not notice. Eventually, I would drift back to sleep, heart beating fast, sweat on my forehead. I never discovered who or what caused it. I never found a solution. The routine of my life adjusted to the silent companion that knew my every habit. I stayed in that house for another year before I finally decided to leave. I packed my things and moved out without telling anyone about what happened. But I will never forget the sound of those taps on my window at 4:37 a.m., gentle and persistent, and the strange absence of any visible source. I will never forget the feeling that no matter where I go, something might be following me, rearranging my belongings, learning my ways. I found the notebook on a Saturday afternoon. I was sitting on a park bench, taking a short break after a long walk. I remember the bench was near a small pond, and a few children were feeding ducks. When I stood up to leave, I noticed a notebook resting on the wood, close to where I had been sitting. It had a plain black cover and no name written on it. I picked it up and flipped through the pages. At first glance, it looked like a journal filled with neat handwriting. I was curious. I read a few lines. They described someone's daily life, simple events like appointments, phone calls, and visits to the grocery store. Then I saw my name. It startled me. The notebook mentioned my job, my exact workplace, and something that happened to me the week before. It described a minor accident I had in my kitchen. I had cut my finger while chopping vegetables. The details were accurate. The time of day, the color of the bandage I used, the curse words I muttered under my breath. I felt my pulse quicken. I stood there, flipping pages, reading about events I recognized. These were all things that had happened to me over the past few months. The handwriting was not mine. I did not know who wrote it, yet it listed my past in a factual tone. It even mentioned things I told no one, like the time I cried alone in my bathroom after a stressful day at work. I looked around the park, feeling exposed. No one seemed to pay attention to me. I slid the notebook into my bag and left. I wanted to read it in private. At home, I locked the door and sat at my kitchen table. I turned the pages slowly, from the beginning. The notebook's first entries were from about a year ago. They described me moving into my new apartment, starting my new job, and buying groceries at a certain store. The entries continued in order, listing events that matched my life precisely. As I reached the current date, I noticed the pages became blank. The next page after yesterday's entry was empty, but as I watched, faint pencil marks appeared. Words formed right in front of me, describing something that I had planned for the next day. I was supposed to meet a friend for coffee. The notebook wrote it down, detailing the name of the cafe and the time we agreed upon. I felt a chill. I slammed the notebook shut and put it in a drawer. I paced around my apartment, breathing fast. I tried to calm down. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone followed me. But how could they know my private thoughts and actions with such detail? The next day, I went to the cafe as planned. I arrived a bit early. My friend was late. When she showed up, we chatted, and everything happened as the notebook described. The exact coffee we ordered, the offhand remark my friend made about the decor. I returned home feeling uneasy. I opened the notebook again. More entries had appeared, covering the events of that day and predicting small things for the next. It said I would misplace my keys for a few minutes before finding them on top of my fridge. That night, I tried to test it. I took my keys and hid them in a drawer before going to sleep, determined to prove it wrong. In the morning, I woke up and could not find my keys in the drawer. I searched the entire apartment, growing more frustrated and nervous. Finally, I spotted them on the fridge. I had no memory of placing them there. Over the next few days, I checked the notebook regularly. Each night, new text appeared, describing the following day's events. These were not major life predictions, just small personal details, but they always came true. Once it said I would break a favorite mug. I tried my best to avoid touching any mug that day. Still, I tripped over a loose shoelace and knocked a cup off the counter. It shattered on the floor. I started feeling trapped. The notebook knew everything. It did not offer explanations, just recorded my life and my immediate future. I wanted to destroy it. One evening, I took it to the bathroom and tried ripping out the pages. The paper tore easily, and I flushed the strips down the toilet. Satisfied, I went to bed. In the morning, I found the notebook intact on my bedside table. Every page was in perfect condition. I flipped through it and saw the events of that day already recorded. I tried other methods. I burned it in the kitchen sink, lighting matches and holding them under the cover. The flames caught, and I watched the cover blacken and curl. I doused it with water after it burned to ashes. I went to my bedroom. There, on my bed, lay the notebook, whole and undamaged. I felt a wave of nausea. My hands trembled. I decided to ignore it. I placed it in a sealed box, taped it shut, and shoved it into a closet. I tried to go about my day as if nothing was wrong. That evening, I returned and checked the closet. The box was empty. The notebook was on my coffee table, open to a new page, describing something that would happen that night. The notebook predicted that I would lose something precious. At first, I did not know what that meant. I had a small necklace given to me by my grandmother. It was the only valuable object I truly cared about. I decided to protect it. I put it in a locked jewelry box and kept the key with me. The notebook wrote, "She will lose the necklace before sunset." I cursed at the words, slammed the notebook shut, and put the necklace in my pocket, refusing to leave it alone. In the afternoon, I went for a walk with the necklace in my pocket. I was so focused on keeping track of it that I did not notice the hole in the lining of my jacket until too late. At home, I realized the necklace was gone. I retraced my steps, searching every sidewalk, every corner. No luck. I had lost it, just as the notebook predicted. I felt anger and fear. I shouted at the notebook, demanding answers. It never responded. It never wrote anything while I watched. The words appeared only when I looked away or left it alone for a while. Over time, the predictions became more personal. It started to mention my emotions, my small habits, the private thoughts I had while alone. I wondered if it was reading my mind. I found notes in it about things I had never said out loud, details I never wrote anywhere. It knew what I cooked for dinner, what I thought about while lying in bed, the exact time I dozed off. I tried leaving the house for a few days, staying at a friend's place, hoping to leave the notebook behind. But it followed me. Each morning, I would find it next to my belongings, no matter where I slept. My friend asked me why I looked so tired and jumpy. I did not know what to say. The notebook's pages filled more quickly. It began describing events further ahead. It mentioned that I would quit my job in a week. I tried to resist, but conflicts at work arose unexpectedly. My boss accused me of mistakes I had not made. I got into a heated argument. By the end of the week, I quit, just as the notebook said. I knew I could not outsmart it. I decided to read ahead, to see what else it predicted. But the notebook's last few pages were always blank. Each day, only a small portion filled in. If I tried to flip ahead and see more, I found nothing but emptiness. New text only appeared page by page, day by day, never too far in advance. I tried to ignore it completely, but it was impossible. Every morning I woke up with dread, wondering what it would predict next. The text became more unsettling. It wrote, "She knows where this ends." That was all it said one night. No details, no events, just that sentence. I stared at it for a long time. What did it mean? The next day I found a new line under that sentence. "She will try to resist, but it will not matter." I felt cold inside. The notebook no longer just documented my life. It threatened me in a way. I tried once again to destroy it. I threw it from a bridge into a river. I watched it float away. I went home feeling hopeful. When I opened my front door, the notebook lay on the floor, dry and intact. I tried to gift it to someone on the street, pretending it was a random notebook. The next morning, I found it on my pillow. I tried burying it in a field at night. The next day, it waited on my kitchen counter. The entries became more disturbing. It mentioned something bad that would happen soon. It never said exactly what, but it hinted at a conclusion. I felt cornered. I started avoiding going out. I stayed inside, curtains drawn. I barely ate, my appetite gone. I kept all my belongings locked away, as if that would help. One morning, the notebook's page said, "Today, she will see a stranger at her door." I waited nervously. Around midday, I heard the doorbell. I approached slowly and looked through the peephole. A delivery man held a package with my name on it. He was a stranger, yes, but harmless. I opened the door and signed for the package. The prediction was correct, but not dangerous. The package contained nothing important, just a book I had ordered online a while ago. Still, I felt tense. That night, the notebook wrote that I would speak to someone from my past on the phone. I had no intention of calling anyone, but a few hours later, my phone rang. It was an old classmate I had not spoken to in years. He said he found my number in an old contact list and decided to check in. I was shocked. After I hung up, I laughed nervously. It was too perfect. The next day, the notebook said, "You know where this ends." It repeated the phrase from before, but now the words were bolder, as if pressed harder into the page. I ran my finger over the letters. They felt slightly raised. I said out loud, "I don't know what you mean." The notebook gave no response, of course. Later that night, it wrote, "Stop pretending. You know where this ends." I felt a tightness in my chest. I tried to think of what it could mean. Maybe it meant my old apartment, my childhood home, or the park where I found the notebook. I decided to return to the park. Maybe I could leave it where I found it. I grabbed the notebook and went out late at night. The park was quiet and empty. I placed the notebook on the same bench and backed away. I waited, half expecting it to vanish or do something strange. Nothing happened. I stood there for a long time, feeling foolish. Eventually, I turned to leave, and there it was again in my bag, even though I had placed it on the bench moments before. I almost screamed. Back home, the notebook now wrote, "She will read until the end. She cannot close it now." I tried slamming it shut. It flew open again, pages flipping by themselves, stopping at a new line of text. It read, "She cannot run." My hands shook. I touched the page, trying to tear it. The page felt stronger than before. I pulled hard, but it would not rip. I felt trapped. I asked it out loud, "What do you want?" No answer. The next line appeared, "It is already decided." I paced my apartment, checking the windows, the door, hoping to see something that made sense. Everything looked normal, except for the impossible book in my hands. The final straw came one morning when I woke to find the entire notebook filled. Every page described events that had not yet happened. I scanned through them quickly. They showed me losing control of my own life, following a path I did not choose. It described me going back to the park, sitting on the bench, and waiting. Waiting for what? I read until I reached the last page. It said, "You know where this ends. You are there now." I felt dizzy. I rushed outside, following some instinct. I went to the park, to the exact bench. I sat down and opened the notebook again. The words began to fade from the pages, leaving them blank. I watched the ink disappear. Then new words formed. "It ends here." I looked around. The park was empty. I waited for something else to happen. The notebook's pages turned white. No text, no marks. I flipped through all of them. Blank. I shouted, frustrated and scared. I shook the notebook, held it upside down. Nothing, just blank pages. I walked home, clutching it, furious and confused. At home, I checked again. Still blank. I placed it on my table and waited. Hours passed. No new text appeared. Eventually, I set it aside and tried to sleep. In the morning, I checked it again. Blank. I checked the next day. Blank. Days turned into weeks. The notebook remained empty, as if it had lost interest. I never understood what happened. I never found out who wrote the initial entries or how it predicted my life so accurately. I never learned why it stopped. The pages remain blank to this day. I keep it locked in a drawer. I do not open it often. Sometimes I dream about words appearing again, showing me a future I cannot avoid. But so far, the pages stay empty, and I am left with nothing but the memories of what it did to me. I moved into my new apartment on a Monday morning. The place was on the 4th floor of an old building. The rooms were small but clean. The hallway smelled like fresh paint. I carried my boxes in by myself, sweating and breathing hard. I arranged my furniture and plugged in my TV. I had a couch, a table, and a single bed. The walls were thin, but I liked the quiet. The building did not seem very busy. The landlord said most units were empty. It felt peaceful. The first few nights were calm. I slept well. On the 4th night, I woke up to a sound above me. Footsteps. Slow, steady footsteps. It was around 2 a.m. I listened carefully. Someone was walking back and forth in the apartment above mine. I did not know anyone lived there. The landlord said the 5th floor was empty. I assumed maybe a new tenant had moved in. I tried to ignore it and went back to sleep. In the morning, I checked the stairwell. The 5th floor hallway had no signs of life. The apartment door above mine was closed and unmarked. The footsteps continued the next night, always at odd hours after midnight. Sometimes the steps were light, sometimes heavier. Sometimes there were pauses, as if the person stopped to listen. I stood in my bedroom, looking at the ceiling. I could almost feel someone standing right above me. In the morning, I spoke to the caretaker. He was a thin man with gray hair who rarely looked me in the eye. I asked if someone lived upstairs. He said no, that the 5th floor was empty. He seemed irritated when I insisted. He told me not to worry. I tried to dismiss it, but the footsteps became a nightly pattern. I would lie in bed, eyes open, listening to the steady sound of shoes on the floor above. The sound made my skin crawl. After a week, I decided to check the 5th floor at night. At around 1 a.m., I took my keys, climbed the stairs quietly, and reached the top landing. The hallway was dark. I had my phone's flashlight. The door to the apartment above mine was closed. I did not hear anything. I waited a few minutes. Nothing. I felt foolish and went back down. The next day I tried again during daylight. I wanted to see if there was any clue. When I got there, I noticed something new. A single shoe placed right in front of the apartment door. It was an old black shoe, worn and dusty. I knocked on the door gently. No answer. I pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. I left the shoe where it was and went downstairs. The caretaker was in the lobby. I told him about the shoe. He shrugged and told me he would check it out. That evening, I went up again. The shoe was gone. That night, the footsteps returned, louder. I heard them in my bedroom, in my living room, as if the person above moved from room to room, tracking my own steps. I felt watched. I tried to focus on a book, but I kept glancing at the ceiling. Eventually, I turned off the light and listened in the dark. The footsteps slowed down, then stopped. Over the next few days, Strange things started happening in my apartment. Small items were moved. I found a spoon on the counter that I remember putting in a drawer. A pen I left on my table ended up on the floor. Nothing was stolen, just moved. I began to feel uneasy. I locked my door carefully at night, checking it twice. I closed the windows and the curtains. Still, I felt as if someone knew my routine. One afternoon, I stepped into the hallway on my floor and found a small wooden box near my door. I had never seen it before. Inside was a folded piece of paper, blank on both sides. I brought it inside and examined it. No writing, no clue. I placed it on a shelf. The next day, the box was gone. I never saw who took it. The footsteps continued above. I started going to bed later, trying to catch the moment they started. They always began after I turned off the lights. Tap, tap, tap across the ceiling. Sometimes I would jump out of bed, rush upstairs, and find nothing. No one in the hallway, no sound, just the empty door. Once, I tried leaving my apartment door slightly open, hoping to hear someone on the stairs. I heard nothing, yet the footsteps kept going above me. I asked the caretaker again if anyone had a key to the upstairs unit. He insisted it was empty, that the landlord kept it locked. He said no one had entered in months. I pointed out that I heard footsteps every night. He shrugged. I asked about the shoe and the box. He said he never saw such things. His attitude annoyed me, but I could not force him to care. I considered calling the landlord. I even drafted a message on my phone. But what would I say? That I heard someone walking in an empty apartment. I imagined them laughing at me. I decided to handle it alone. I set up my phone to record audio at night. I placed it on a chair and hit record before going to bed. In the morning, I played it back. The microphone picked up the footsteps clearly, slow and steady. Sometimes they stopped for long moments, then resumed. I heard no other sounds, no voices, no doors opening or closing. I tried to match my movements to the sounds. One night, I walked from my bedroom to the kitchen and listened. The footsteps upstairs seemed to follow. When I stopped moving, they stopped too. I felt sweat on my neck. I called out, "Who's up there?" No response, just silence. After I got back into bed, the footsteps started again. I began to lose sleep. I woke up tired, my body tense. I became jumpy at work. Every small sound made me nervous. I started hating the nights, dreading the moment the footsteps would begin. After a few weeks, I noticed something else. Objects began appearing outside my door at random times. Once it was a single sock. Another time, a piece of old newspaper folded into a square. Another time, a small key that did not fit any lock in my apartment. I left these items where I found them, hoping the caretaker would notice, but they always disappeared by the next day. I never saw anyone pick them up. I tried staking out the hallway. I sat on the stairs for an hour, waiting quietly. No one came. When I finally gave up and went back inside, I found another object in front of my door, a short piece of string tied in a knot. My heart pounded. I wanted to confront whoever was doing this, but I had no idea who it was. I started to think the person upstairs knew my schedule perfectly. They walked when I was about to sleep. They moved things when I was out. I asked my neighbors if they heard anything. I only found one neighbor 2 floors below who said she never heard a thing. The rest of the units seemed empty. No one else to confirm my story. The caretaker avoided me now. He answered questions with grunts and walked away quickly. I felt alone in this. I stopped trying to reason with him. Instead, I spent more time observing. I noticed the footsteps never happened during the day, only at night. Also, they never lasted past dawn. They would always stop a bit before sunrise. One night, I decided to push my luck. At around midnight, I took a chair and placed it under my bedroom ceiling light. I tapped the ceiling with a broom handle. I tapped 3 times, hard. The footsteps stopped immediately. For a full minute, I heard nothing. Then I heard 3 taps back, faint and muffled, as if from inside the ceiling. My throat tightened. I asked again, "Who are you?" No answer. I tapped once more. Silence. I got down from the chair and sat on the bed, breathing fast. My hands were shaking. I turned off the light and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, waiting. After a few minutes, the footsteps resumed. It sounded like the person was pacing slowly, deliberately. I felt sweat on my forehead. I could not sleep that night. I left the lights on and waited for morning. As weeks passed, I adapted to this bizarre situation. I could not get rid of the footsteps, and I could not catch the person. I tried leaving a note on the upstairs door, but it was gone by the next day. I tried dusting the hallway floor with flour to see footprints, but in the morning the flour was undisturbed. I tried listening at the door upstairs for long periods, but I never heard breathing or movement. Yet at night, the steps always returned. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. I felt it even during the day. I would sit on my couch, and suddenly I would feel eyes on me. I would turn around, expecting someone at the window, but saw no one. I would walk to the bathroom and feel a presence behind me. I would open the door to the hallway and feel the air change, like someone had been standing there a moment before. One morning, I woke up and found a small envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a piece of paper with a single drawn line on it. No words, just a line. I examined it, looking for a clue. Nothing. I tore it up and threw it away. I checked the 5th floor again. The door was still locked. I tried the doorknob. It was solid. I tried peeking through the keyhole, but I saw only darkness. The footsteps never came to my floor. They stayed above. But I feared that one day I would hear them on my stairs, approaching my apartment. That fear kept me on edge. I made sure to keep my phone charged, though I had no idea who to call. The police would laugh if I told them about mysterious footsteps in an empty apartment. Over time, I noticed the footsteps sometimes followed a pattern. They would start near the bedroom area, move toward where I assumed was the living room above, then return. It felt like the person was pacing, thinking, waiting. But waiting for what? I had no answers. The caretaker would not help. The landlord never responded to my messages. The other tenants were either absent or oblivious. I lived with this constant tension. My sleep got worse. I ate less. I lost weight. I started checking my locks multiple times a night. I considered moving out, but I had just signed a lease, and I did not have much money left. One night, after I had given up confronting the unknown, I lay in bed with my eyes closed. The footsteps were above, softer now. I listened, trying to ignore them. Suddenly they stopped. I heard a faint scraping sound, like a chair moved across a floor. Then silence. I waited. For the first time, I felt as if the presence had left. I did not know if it was permanent. The next morning, I found nothing unusual at my door. No objects, no notes. The hallway smelled the same. The caretaker avoided my eyes as usual. That night, no footsteps came. I waited and waited, ears straining. Nothing. The silence should have comforted me, but it made me even more nervous. I kept expecting the footsteps to return. They did not come back that night, nor the next. After 3 nights of silence, I began to relax slightly. I told myself maybe it was over. Maybe whoever it was had left. I slept better. I started to think the whole thing was some prank or a squatter who found another place. But on the 4th night of silence, Right when I was drifting off to sleep, I heard one single step above. Just one. My heart jumped. I turned on the light, waited. No more steps, just that single, isolated sound. Was it a warning? A reminder? I still live here, but I cannot say I feel safe. The footsteps have not returned in full, but sometimes I hear faint sounds above. Sometimes I find small objects outside my door again, but rarely. The caretaker still denies everything. I stopped asking. I try to live my life normally, but I feel observed, like something knows every move I make. I have no proof, no answers, just the memory of those nightly footsteps, the strange items, the shoe, the notes. The empty apartment above remains locked and silent by day, but I know that at night, if I listen carefully, I might still hear a single step, a quiet reminder that I am not alone. I remember the first time the intercom buzzed. It was around 11 at night. I had just sat down on the couch with a glass of water. The sound was a short buzz, the kind that comes when someone presses the call button at the front door of the building. I got up, walked over to the small wall-mounted unit near my kitchen, and picked up the receiver. I said, "Hello?" But there was no response, just a soft static. I waited a few seconds, then hung up. I figured it was a prank or someone pressing the wrong apartment number. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same short buzz. This time, when I answered, I heard a faint whisper. I asked, "Who's there?" Nothing. I heard only a soft breathing sound. I hung up. I felt a slight chill in my stomach. I told myself it was probably a neighbor messing around. The third night, the buzz came at exactly 11. I answered immediately. A voice spoke. It was quiet but clear. It said, "Let me in. I need to see you." I asked who it was. The voice said a name I recognized. It was the name of a former tenant, a guy who used to live in my apartment before I moved in. I never met him, but the landlord mentioned that he disappeared under strange circumstances. My heart rate picked up. I said, "He doesn't live here anymore. You have the wrong apartment." The line went dead. I put the receiver down and walked to the window. I looked outside. The street below was mostly empty. A couple of parked cars, a street lamp, no one standing there. I locked my door and double-checked the windows. I tried to sleep, but kept waking up at small noises. On the fourth night, I waited by the intercom. At 11, it buzzed. I grabbed the receiver quickly. The voice said, "I know you recognize the name. Let me in." I felt my forehead damp with sweat. I told the voice to leave me alone. It replied, "You know I can't do that." Then it described what I was wearing, a blue t-shirt and gray sweatpants. I looked down, shocked. I said nothing. The voice went silent. I hung up, feeling my skin crawl. How could they see me? I checked my curtains. They were closed. I looked through the peephole in my door. Hallway empty. The next morning I tried to talk to the landlord. He brushed me off, said the intercom sometimes got crossed wires. I mentioned the name of the old tenant. He said he didn't know anything about that. He avoided my eyes and walked away. I asked a neighbor if they got strange calls. They shook their head, said no. That evening, I decided not to answer the intercom. At 11, it buzzed anyway. I ignored it. After a minute, it buzzed again, longer this time. I covered my ears. Eventually, it stopped. I let out a breath. But then I heard the voice in the hallway. I opened my door a crack and listened. The voice sounded like it was coming from the corridor's speaker system, the one the building sometimes used for announcements. It said my apartment number, repeating it slowly. It said my name. I slammed my door shut and locked it. My heart pounded. How did it know my name? I turned on the TV for noise. I kept the volume low, but enough to distract myself. After a few minutes, I turned it off again and listened. Silence. I checked the intercom. It was quiet. I went to bed, but I barely slept. The next night, I made a plan. I put on dark clothes and stood in the hallway near the main staircase. At 11, I waited, watching the lobby from above through the glass panels. I wanted to see if anyone approached the intercom outside. Exactly at 11, I heard the buzz echo through the stairwell. I peered down. The front door area was empty. No one pressed the buzzer. Yet my apartment intercom was ringing. I hurried back to my apartment. I picked up the receiver. The voice said, "I see you've been busy. You're trying to catch me." I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I asked, "What do you want?" The voice answered, "I want in. I want what he had. I want to come upstairs." I realized it was talking about the old tenant. "He's gone," I said. The voice laughed softly, a dry sound. "I know he's gone. That's why you must let me in." I hung up and pulled the cord from the wall. The intercom went silent. I thought I solved it. But then, from the hallway speaker, I heard it again. My apartment number repeated, my name repeated, and then, "You can't hide." I grabbed my jacket and decided to leave the building for a while. I went out into the street. It was quiet. I walked a few blocks, trying to calm down. After about 10 minutes, I heard a faint crackling sound behind me. Then the voice spoke again, this time from a small speaker attached to a nearby shop's closed shutter. One of those security cameras with audio warnings. It said my apartment number. I stumbled back, panicked. It knew I left the building. It was following me through the city's speakers. I hurried further down the street. I passed under a streetlight and heard the voice again, coming from the streetlight's small electrical box, distorted but clear enough to say my name. I looked around, desperate. No one was nearby, no cars passing. I shouted, "Leave me alone!" The voice didn't respond. I started running. I ran until I reached a busier avenue, with a few late-night stores still open. I stood outside a convenience store and listened. Nothing. I felt a moment of relief. Maybe I outran it. I stepped inside, pretending to browse the shelves. The clerk gave me a curious look. I tried to look normal. After a few minutes, I left and started walking back toward my building, slowly, nervously. Halfway there, I passed a payphone. It rang as I walked by. I jumped. It kept ringing. I ignored it at first, then I approached it. My hands shook. I lifted the receiver. The voice said my name again. I slammed the receiver down and hurried away, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. When I reached my building, I found the front door locked, as usual. I had my keys ready. I stepped inside and looked at the lobby intercom panel. It was dark and silent. I rushed upstairs. On my floor, I found nothing unusual. I entered my apartment and locked the door. Then I pushed a chair under the doorknob, just in case. I checked my phone, thinking I could call someone. The signal was weak. Before I could dial, I heard the intercom buzz again. But I had pulled the cord. How was it buzzing? I approached carefully. The receiver lay on the counter, disconnected, yet the device hummed. I picked up the receiver piece without the cord. The voice was there. "You can run, but I'll always find a way in," it said softly. I threw the receiver down and covered my ears. The voice continued, muffled but persistent. It said the name of the old tenant again. It asked if I knew what happened to him. I shouted back, "I don't know. I don't care. Leave me alone." The voice giggled, a flat, joyless sound. Suddenly, it began describing my apartment's layout. It mentioned the small painting on my wall, the coffee mug on my table, the smell of my laundry basket. I spun around, searching for a hidden camera or microphone. I found nothing. I checked the windows. They were locked, curtains drawn. The peephole showed an empty hallway. I felt trapped. I grabbed my suitcase and decided to leave for good. I tossed clothes into it, not caring what I packed. I zipped it up and headed for the door. As I reached for the chair under the knob, I heard the voice right behind me. It said, "Don't go." I froze. I felt no breath on my neck, but the voice was close, as if someone stood inches away. I turned around sharply. No one was there. I moved the chair and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The lights flickered for a second. I hurried to the stairs, carrying my suitcase. On the second-floor landing, I heard static from the building's intercom speaker in the corridor. The voice said, "Going somewhere?" I ignored it and ran down the next flight of stairs. In the lobby, I yanked the front door open and stepped onto the street. It was almost midnight now. The street was still. I dragged my suitcase along the sidewalk, heading for a hotel or a friend's place. I passed another payphone. It started ringing. I didn't answer. A block later, I stood under a billboard with a small speaker broadcasting announcements. It was silent until I approached, then static, and the voice said my apartment number again, over and over. I ran across the street, nearly slipping on the curb. My mind raced. Could I escape this voice if I left the city, took a taxi and drove far away? I spotted a taxi parked near a closed restaurant. I waved. The driver nodded. I got in and told him to take me anywhere, just drive. He asked if I was okay. I lied and said yes. The taxi's radio crackled. I felt dread rising. Before the driver could turn it up, I told him to keep it off. He shrugged. We drove for 20 minutes in silence. I watched the buildings pass by. I saw no sign of the voice. I began to relax slightly, though I gripped the seat. Eventually, I told the driver to drop me at a modest hotel near the outskirts. I got out, paid him, and entered the lobby of the hotel. The hotel receptionist looked bored. I asked for a room. He checked his computer and gave me a key card. I took the elevator up to the second floor. The elevator's speaker played faint music. I listened carefully. No voice. I reached my room, locked the door, closed the curtains. The room was plain: a bed, a small desk, a TV, a bathroom door. Everything seemed normal. I sat on the bed and waited. 1 hour passed, then 2. No sounds. I turned on the TV to distract myself. Static flickered on the screen before settling on a local channel. I nearly had a heart attack when I thought I heard a whisper. I muted the TV. Silence. I turned it off and sat in the dark. Around 3 a.m., my cell phone buzzed. I checked the screen. Unknown number. My hands shook. I answered slowly, holding my breath. At first, silence. Then the voice, faint but clear. "I found you." I threw the phone on the bed. It kept making static noises. I ripped the battery out of the phone. I sat on the floor, back against the door, tears in my eyes. I asked out loud, "What do you want from me?" The only answer was the hum of the room's air conditioning unit. I waited, expecting the voice from somewhere in the room, but nothing happened. In the morning, I checked out of the hotel and wandered the streets for hours. I avoided all electronic devices. I stayed away from speakers, from phones, from anything that could carry sound. I passed a store window and saw my reflection. I looked tired, unshaven, eyes red. Eventually, I had to face reality. I could not live like this. I needed to go back to my apartment, gather my things properly, and find a permanent solution. Maybe move to another city, somewhere remote with no intercoms or wired connections. I took a bus back to my neighborhood, avoiding eye contact with everyone. When I entered my building's lobby, it felt heavier, as if the air was thick. The intercom panel on the wall was silent. I took the stairs slowly, listening for any sound. On my floor, I found nothing strange. My apartment door was closed, locked. I unlocked it and stepped inside. Everything looked as I left it, just messier. I tested the intercom. Dead. No dial tone, no buzz. I tried my cell phone with a new battery. No strange calls. For a moment, I thought maybe it ended. Maybe leaving that night broke the pattern. I spent the day packing my belongings into boxes. At around 11 p.m., I felt my heart sink. It was that time again. I stood in the center of my living room, holding my breath. Nothing. No buzz, no voice. I exhaled, relief washing over me. Then my TV turned on by itself, showing static. The speaker crackled. I stepped back slowly. The voice emerged from the static. "You can't escape." I grabbed the TV's power cord and yanked it out. It kept playing static. I pulled the TV away from the wall, dropped it on the floor. The screen cracked, but the voice still came through the speaker, faint and distorted. "I'll follow you," it said. I ran out into the hallway, leaving everything behind. As I descended the stairs, I heard my apartment number repeated from the building's intercom system in the lobby, even though no one was there to press any button. I burst through the front door and into the street, determined never to return. I still wander now, avoiding electronic devices. I stay in places with no intercoms, no public address systems. Yet sometimes, late at night, I hear a faint whisper from a distant speaker on a lamppost or a buzzing payphone. It always says my name or my old apartment number. I keep moving, never staying too long in one place. I don't know if I can ever outrun it, but I try. I first noticed the book during a quiet afternoon in the university library. I was sitting at a long wooden table near the back, trying to finish an assignment. The place was almost empty. A few students sat scattered across the room, silently reading. The librarian moved between shelves, placing books in their correct spots. Everything felt normal. When I got up to grab a reference from a nearby shelf, I left my belongings at the table. I was gone maybe 2 minutes. When I returned, I saw an unfamiliar book lying on top of my notebook. It had a plain cover, a dull brown color, with no title or author. I assumed someone left it there by mistake. I looked around, but no one seemed to notice or care. I opened it. The pages were yellowed and slightly rough. The text inside looked like standard print at first glance. As I flipped through it, the words seemed strange. They described events from my past semester. They mentioned lectures I attended, a conversation I had with a friend about a movie, and even the time I spilled coffee on my shirt in the cafeteria. I felt a chill run down my arms. This made no sense. I closed the book and checked the cover again. No title, no markings. I pushed it aside and continued my work, deciding I would show it to the librarian later. When I finished studying and stood up to leave, I remembered the book. I grabbed it and walked toward the front desk. I told the librarian someone left it on my table. The librarian took it, glanced at the cover, and said she would check where it belonged. I nodded and left. The next day, I returned to the library as usual. I picked a different table. I studied for about an hour without interruption. When I got up to use the restroom, I left my bag and books on the table. Coming back, I found the same brown book waiting for me right beside my laptop. I felt my heart beat faster. I knew I had given it to the librarian. How did it return? I opened it again. The text had changed. Now it mentioned what I did the night before. I went home, heated some leftover pasta, and watched a silly video online. It described the exact time I fell asleep and the clothes I wore. My throat tightened. I closed the book, looked around, and saw no one paying attention to me. I decided to put it back on the shelf myself. I picked a random aisle and placed it between two thick volumes. I made sure it was deep in there. Then I left the library. I tried not to think about it. The next morning I entered the library with a sense of dread. I chose a desk near the front where it was busier. I sat down, took out my notes, and studied. After about 30 minutes I looked up. The brown book was on my desk again, right next to my notes. My chest felt tight. I hadn't left my seat this time. I was sure it wasn't there when I started. I demanded an explanation from a nearby student. He looked at me confused, said he didn't see anyone place a book there. I opened the book again. This time the words described what I was doing in real time, as if narrating my actions at that very moment. It mentioned the pen in my hand, the page I was reading, and even the tapping of my foot under the table. I slammed it shut. My hands shook. I decided to get rid of it once and for all. I left the library with the book under my arm. I walked across campus and found a trash bin behind a building. I dropped it in, covered it with some discarded papers, and left quickly. I felt relief. The next day, I didn't go to the library. I stayed in my dorm room, working on assignments. In the afternoon, I opened my backpack to grab my notebook. The brown book was inside, resting on top of my notes. I almost screamed. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling. I tried tearing a page out. The paper would not tear. I tried harder, pulling with all my strength. The page didn't rip, didn't even crease. It was like trying to tear metal. I tried to burn it. I went outside behind my dorm where no one would see me. I lit a match and held it to the cover. The flame flickered, but the book didn't catch fire. The cover remained intact. I pressed harder, scorching the match head against it. Nothing. No mark, no burn. I returned to my room, sweating. I shoved it into a drawer. When I opened the drawer a minute later, the book was gone. I looked behind me. It was lying on my desk. I felt dizzy and sat on the bed, staring at it. I opened it carefully. The text now described my attempt to destroy it, mentioning the match and my frustration. I flipped through the pages. Some blank pages at the end started filling in as I watched. Words appeared, forming sentences about what I would do next. It was describing my future actions before I made them. I tried ignoring it. I left the dorm and went to the cafeteria. I ate a sandwich alone, checking my phone messages. I tried to pretend the book didn't exist. When I got back, it was waiting on my bed. I read the new text. It said I would lose something precious today. My heart sank. I locked my door and searched my belongings. Everything seemed fine. I decided I wouldn't leave the room, wouldn't give it a chance to make the prediction come true. An hour later, I realized my room key was missing from my desk, where I usually left it. I searched everywhere, under the bed, inside the closet, in my jacket pockets. Nothing. I had lost the key. The book told the truth. From that day on, I tried to live normally, but the book followed me everywhere. It appeared in my bag, on my desk at the library, even once inside a classroom when I returned from a break. Each time I looked inside, it recorded my past, present, and future events with perfect accuracy. It knew everything about me. It knew who I talked to, what I ate, what time I woke up. I told a friend about it. She looked at me as if I was joking. I showed her the book. To her, it looked like a blank journal, no text at all. She flipped through the pages and saw nothing. I argued with her, insisted that there were words. She shook her head. I looked again. The words were there, clear to me, but apparently invisible to her. I realized only I could see the text. I tried showing it to another friend, even to a professor. Same result. They saw blank pages. I felt isolated and afraid. The book's predictions started to control my life. When it said I would miss a class, I tried my best to attend, but the professor canceled it last minute. When it said I would fail a quiz, I studied all night, but the quiz covered material I never saw before. Every prediction came true, no matter what I did to avoid it. I became paranoid. I stopped going out with friends. I stayed away from the library. I kept the book locked in a trunk, under 3 layers of clothing. I checked after 5 minutes. It lay on top of my desk again, impossible to contain. I tried contacting the library's administration. I asked if they had a record of the book. The librarian looked up inventory records. Nothing matched the description. No brown book without a title was ever registered. I thought about leaving campus altogether. Maybe if I went far away, it would lose track of me. I took a bus to the next town and stayed at a cheap motel overnight. When I woke up, the book was on the pillow beside me. I cursed and almost threw it out the window. But I knew it wouldn't matter. It would return. The text became darker. It started hinting that something important was coming. Events that would change my life. It never gave details, just vague warnings. I grew more anxious. I lost weight. I slept poorly, always expecting the next prediction to ruin my day. One night, I read the book carefully. I tried to see if I could find a pattern or a clue. The pages near the end remained mostly blank, but occasionally new words formed. I asked out loud, "What do you want?" Of course, it didn't answer. It just wrote more events. I asked if I could stop it. The text described me asking that question, but gave no solution. I tried to do something completely random and unexpected. I hopped on one foot, sang a silly tune, wrote nonsense words on a piece of paper. Then I opened the book to see if it predicted those actions. It did. Every detail matched. I realized I had no privacy, no freedom. Everything I did was recorded and predicted. The book was like a prison. I became desperate. I thought about extreme measures. One morning I took a hammer and tried smashing it. The hammer's head snapped off. The book remained intact. I slammed it against a metal railing outside. Nothing. It was indestructible. I returned to the library, thinking maybe the place of origin could help. I placed the book on the exact spot I first found it. I waited and watched from behind a shelf. After a few minutes, I saw it vanish. I rushed back to my desk, and it was waiting for me there. My heart sank. The predictions got worse. It said I would lose contact with a close friend. The next day, my best friend stopped answering my messages and avoided me in person. I tried to fix it, but something always went wrong. The book knew how to break my life apart, step by step. It said I would fail an important exam. I studied for a week straight. During the exam, I became ill suddenly and had to leave halfway. I failed. The book predicted it. Then it wrote a final note. "You know where this ends." I stared at those words for a long time. What did it mean? I tried to ignore it, but my curiosity grew. Maybe it referred to the library, or the first table where I found it, or someplace I had been before. I went back to the library at night when it was about to close. I sat at the same table where I first saw the book. I opened it. The pages were filling in rapidly. Words appeared, describing me sitting there, the smell of old books, the silence in the room. I waited for something else. After a few minutes, nothing new appeared. Just the phrase, "You know where this ends," repeated at the bottom of the page. The librarian announced closing time. I stayed until the last minute. As I got up, I felt a strange calm. I knew I couldn't destroy the book. I knew it followed me anywhere. But maybe if I accepted it, it would stop. I placed it carefully on the shelf where I had first hidden it. I turned and walked away. The next morning I woke up and checked my desk. No book. I checked my bag, my drawers, my shelves. It was gone. I couldn't believe it. I searched my entire dorm room. Nothing. At the library, I checked the shelf. It wasn't there either. I asked the librarian again, and she said no unknown books were found. I panicked, half expecting it to appear behind me, but it didn't. I sat down at a table, waiting. Hours passed. Nothing. I went home and waited all evening. No sign of the book. Day after day passed. It never returned. I tried to carry on with my life. Without the constant predictions, I felt lost, but also relieved. I could make decisions without fear of it coming true no matter what. I felt uncertain, but that uncertainty meant I was free again. I never discovered what it really was. Maybe it was testing me, or maybe I somehow passed its trial by returning it to where it started. Maybe it got bored. I have no answers, but it never came back. I still think about it sometimes, checking my bag or my desk for that dull brown cover. The memory alone makes me tense. Now I move forward, day by day, not knowing the future, and that's how I want it. I first noticed the figure a few days after I started taking my afternoon breaks at the park. The park had a row of benches facing a small fountain. I liked to sit there around 4 p.m., sipping a coffee from a nearby cafe. It helped clear my head after a long day at work. On this particular afternoon, I saw a person sitting on the bench across from me. I say person because I couldn't see their face. They wore a long coat and a hat. The hat's brim hid their features. They faced away from me, holding a newspaper spread wide. I didn't think much of it at first. The next day, the figure was there again. Same bench, same posture, facing away. The newspaper looked old-fashioned, with large headlines and small print. I glanced at the cover. The date looked strange. I squinted to read it. It seemed to list tomorrow's date, not today's. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I must have misread it. Before I could get a better look, a gust of wind rattled some leaves, and by the time I looked up again, the figure was gone. No sound of footsteps, no movement, just gone. The day after, I arrived earlier, around 3:45 p.m. The bench was empty. I sipped my coffee, watched the fountain's water jets, and tried to relax. At exactly 4 p.m., I turned my head and saw the figure again. Same coat, same hat, back turned to me, newspaper held up. I felt a slight chill. I leaned forward, trying to see the front page of the paper. It had a headline mentioning a local event, something that hadn't happened yet. It read something like, "Car accident on Elm Street injures 2." The date was tomorrow's date again. I muttered to myself, that can't be right. I watched the figure carefully. They never turned the page, never spoke, never moved, just sat there, holding that paper. After a few minutes, I stood up and walked around the fountain to approach from the side. As I neared, I felt tension in my shoulders. I wanted to see their face. But when I turned the corner, the bench was empty. I spun around, checking if someone had just stood up. No one. A few joggers passed by, but no one in a coat and hat. My heart beat faster. This was getting weird. The next day I told myself it was just a trick of my imagination. But at 4 p.m., there the figure was again, newspaper in hand. This time, I stayed put. I looked at my phone's camera and tried to zoom in. The camera showed the figure holding a newspaper with a headline I couldn't read. The light made it too blurry. I lowered my phone and looked directly again. The headline looked clear now. Local resident wins unexpected prize. It gave tomorrow's date. I wrote down the headline in my phone's notes. I thought maybe I could check if these events really happened the following day. That night, I watched the local news. No mention of a car accident yet. The next morning, I checked the local news websites. There it was. A car accident on Elm Street had occurred around midnight. 2 people injured, exactly as the paper predicted. I felt my stomach drop. It couldn't be a coincidence. The next day, I checked the lottery results. Some lucky local resident had indeed won a small prize at a local raffle. It matched the second headline. I didn't know what to do with this information. Should I approach the figure, ask who they were? Would they even answer? I decided to confront them. Around 4 p.m., I arrived at the park. I sat on my usual bench, heart pounding. The figure appeared, as if popping into existence the moment I blinked. I stood up immediately and walked straight toward them. "Excuse me," I said. No response. They didn't move. I circled the fountain and came up from behind, leaning forward to peek at the newspaper. I got close enough to see another future headline. Rainstorm causes power outages. Date, tomorrow. I cleared my throat loudly. "Who are you?" I said. Still no response. I reached out, intending to tap their shoulder. Just before my hand touched the coat, I heard a faint rustling sound, and the figure vanished. The bench was empty. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I looked around. A couple walking by gave me a strange look. They must have seen me talking to an empty bench. I stepped back, breathing heavily. The next day, it rained heavily in the evening, knocking out power in several neighborhoods, just like the headline predicted. By now, I was sure the figure was reading newspapers from the future, right in front of me. I began writing down the headlines each day. The figure showed up daily at exactly 4 p.m., never earlier, never later. I kept my distance and tried different angles to see the newspaper. Each time, the paper's main story predicted something specific happening the next day. Sometimes small things, sometimes serious events. A missing pet found, a restaurant kitchen fire, a protest downtown, and so on. Every event came true. I tried warning people about upcoming incidents. Once, it predicted a water main break on a certain street. I told a friend who lived there to be careful. He laughed and said I was acting strange. The next day, his street flooded due to a burst pipe. He was shocked. He asked how I knew. I told him about the figure at the park. He didn't believe me fully, but he couldn't explain my accurate warning. I tried recording the figure with my phone, but the footage always came out distorted. I tried bringing a friend to see the figure. When we arrived, I looked at the bench and saw it there, newspaper raised. My friend saw nothing, just an empty bench. I pointed and shouted, "Right there!" He shook his head, worried about me. So the figure was only visible to me. That made me feel alone and more anxious. I watched every day's headline and tried to guess why this was happening. Was the figure warning me, taunting me, or just showing me random events? One afternoon, after weeks of this routine, I saw a headline that involved me personally. It said, "Local man faces personal danger at night." It gave tomorrow's date. My heart froze. I was that local man, right? I had no proof, but who else would it mean? I spent the whole evening locked in my apartment, terrified. I didn't go out. I made sure windows and doors were locked. Around midnight, I heard shouting outside. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. But I stayed awake, nervous. By morning, I realized nothing had happened to me. Maybe I misread the headline. I rushed to the park at 4 p.m. The figure was there again, same as always. I squinted hard at the paper. Today's headline read, "Man avoids predicted danger by hiding." My heart skipped. It acknowledged my action. So it was definitely about me now. I shouted at the figure, "What do you want from me?" Of course, no answer. I tried approaching again, but it vanished as soon as I got too close. Days passed with more predictions, some small, some big. I followed them, tried to prevent bad things, but nothing changed. They still happened. If I warned people, they never believed me, or I couldn't reach the right person in time. I felt helpless. Then one day, I approached the park as usual, but I came early. I hid behind a tree, watching the bench from a distance. At 4 p.m., I blinked, and there it was, the figure, newspaper raised. This time, the headline shook me. Tomorrow, something happens to him. Just that vague phrase. Something happens to him. I had no idea what it meant. Danger, fortune, loss. I spent the evening pacing in my apartment. I checked all my locks again. I called a friend to talk, but I didn't mention the figure. I just needed a friendly voice. After hanging up, I sat in silence, listening to my clock tick. I barely slept. The next morning, I woke up feeling tense. Nothing unusual happened during the first half of the day. I went to work, feeling paranoid. Every time I crossed the street, I looked both ways twice. Every time I heard a loud noise, I jumped. By the afternoon, nothing serious had happened. I began to relax, thinking maybe it was nothing big. But as I left work, someone bumped into me on the sidewalk. I stumbled and fell. I landed hard on my knee, scraping it. The stranger apologized and helped me up. I realized this might be the something that happened to me. Just a small accident. I sighed with relief. At 4 p.m., I went to the park again, curious about the next headline. The figure was there. Today's headline read, "Man misinterprets event." My stomach knotted. I had misinterpreted the accident maybe. That wasn't the real event. Something else was coming. I rushed home, nervous. In the evening my phone rang. It was a family member calling with bad news. A distant relative had passed away unexpectedly. That hit me hard. That must have been the something the newspaper meant. I felt sick. I realized how cruel this was. The figure was telling me things I couldn't change, only dread. I returned to the park the next day, feeling angry and helpless. The figure's headline read, "He tries to change fate." I decided enough was enough. I grabbed a piece of chalk and wrote down the event predicted in the newspaper on a walkway nearby. I wrote, "Tomorrow a fire breaks out at 5th Street Diner." I wrote the time and date. I hoped someone would see it, maybe the diner owner, and take precautions. The next day, I visited the diner at the predicted time. I warned the staff, begged them to check the kitchen. They laughed, said I was crazy. While I stood outside, hoping for nothing to happen, a small electrical spark caused a minor flame in the wiring box. The staff smelled smoke early because I had made them cautious. They put it out quickly. The fire never spread. It didn't become the big incident the newspaper predicted. I felt a small surge of triumph. I changed something. At 4 p.m., I returned to the park. The figure was there. The headline read, "He interferes successfully." So it acknowledged my success. I felt hope. Maybe I could prevent more tragedies. I spent the next few days trying to foil the future predictions. Whenever it predicted something bad, I warned people, took action, tried to influence events. Sometimes I succeeded in reducing the damage. Sometimes I failed, but not always. Then one day the headline was about me again. He grows dependent on the headlines. I realized I was now living only to read the future each day at 4 p.m. My entire life revolved around the figure and its newspaper. I didn't like that realization. I decided to skip the park the next day. At 4 p.m., I stayed home. My phone buzzed with news alerts. Things happened as predicted before, accidents, small events. But I didn't know what was predicted, so I didn't interfere. I felt guilty, but also free. I had to break this cycle. The next day, I forced myself to walk by the park without looking at the bench. I kept my eyes forward. I resisted the urge to check if the figure was there. I heard a faint rustling sound behind me but didn't turn. I walked away, out of the park. A week passed. I didn't visit the park at 4 p.m. I tried to live my life normally. Without knowing the future, I felt anxious but also relieved. Life was uncertain again. No predetermined headlines to scare me. I wondered if the figure still appeared. I considered asking someone to watch the bench at 4 p.m., but no one else saw it before. After 2 weeks, my curiosity got the better of me. I returned to the park at 4 p.m. I saw only an empty bench. No figure, no newspaper. I waited a few minutes. Nothing. The figure was gone. I sat down, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. No one would read me tomorrow's headlines anymore. I was on my own. I realized I had been given a strange gift and curse, a look into tomorrow's news. I had helped some people, failed others, but now it was over, and I could return to a normal life. As I got up to leave, a small scrap of paper on the ground caught my eye. I picked it up. It had a date, tomorrow's date, and a few words scribbled, "You remember what you learned." That was all. I pocketed the paper and walked away. Since then, I never saw the figure again. I follow the news like everyone else, learning about events after they happen. I still wonder who that figure was, why it appeared to me, and what it wanted. Maybe I'll never know. But I understand now that life's uncertainty is normal, and knowing the future doesn't always help. Sometimes it just makes everything harder. I arrived at the rented house on a Friday afternoon. The place was chosen for a work retreat. Our small team needed time away from the office. The house sat at the end of a narrow road, surrounded by low trees and quiet fields. It had 2 floors, a large living room, and a kitchen with a big chalkboard on the wall. The landlord told us the chalkboard was for shopping lists and meal plans. No one questioned it. We were 8 people total. We all worked at the same company, in the same department, but we weren't very close. This retreat was supposed to help us bond and improve teamwork. We unpacked our bags. The living room had a fireplace, a few armchairs, and a large rug. The kitchen looked modern, with an old-fashioned wooden table in the center. The chalkboard took up most of one wall. It was empty and clean when we arrived. We placed our groceries on the counter and started cooking dinner. Someone took a piece of chalk and wrote a small list of items we needed. More bread, more coffee. We planned to drive to a nearby store the next day. That evening, we sat around the table, eating pasta and drinking wine. The mood was relaxed. We joked about our boss's silly memos and made fun of our office routines. Around midnight, we went to our rooms. I slept upstairs in a single bed. The night felt quiet and still. In the morning, I went to the kitchen to make coffee. I froze when I saw the chalkboard. It had a message that I didn't recognize. Don't forget milk. It wasn't strange at first. Maybe someone woke early and wrote it. I asked around. Nobody admitted adding that line. People shrugged, said maybe someone forgot they wrote it. No one made a big deal out of it. We spent the day discussing work projects in the living room, taking notes on laptops. The chalkboard stayed in the background, ignored. Around lunchtime, someone noticed a new message under the first one. Meeting at 3 p.m. Be ready. That was odd. We didn't plan any meeting. We were all already together. I asked who wrote it. Everyone denied it. A few people got annoyed, asked if this was a prank. I said it wasn't me. Others also claimed innocence. We let it go, thinking maybe someone was trying to be funny. At 3 p.m. we were in the living room, not having any special meeting. The chalkboard remained silent. After dinner, I checked it again. Another line appeared. You all have secrets. The handwriting looked the same as before, neat but generic. Everyone swore they did not write it. Tension rose a bit. We started accusing each other of playing a prank. Some got defensive. I suggested erasing the board. We wiped it clean, leaving no words behind. We stayed up late, drinking and talking. The mood had shifted slightly. People were on edge, glancing at the kitchen door. Eventually, we went to sleep. In the morning, I rushed to the kitchen first. New words on the board. She lied about the budget. We had a female colleague who handled budget reports. She demanded to know who wrote it. She was furious. We all argued. Some said it was an immature prank. Others suspected one of us wanted to create chaos. We decided to erase it again and ignore any new messages. We agreed no one would write anything else. If we caught someone, they'd have to admit it. We spent the day trying to work on our project, but we were distracted. Every hour or so, someone would walk into the kitchen to check the board. By late afternoon, we found another message. He stole from the petty cash. Now it targeted one of the guys. He denied it, got angry, and shouted that this was slander. We erased it again, voices raised, faces red. During dinner, no one spoke much. We ate in silence, suspicious of each other. After dinner, the chalkboard had another message. You know who is next. We all stood there, staring at it. Nobody made a move to erase it this time. Someone suggested covering the board with a sheet. We found a large towel and pinned it over the chalkboard. Out of sight, out of mind, we hoped. We sat in the living room trying to focus on work again. It didn't work. Eventually, we gave up and decided to watch a movie. Halfway through the movie, we heard a scratching sound from the kitchen. We paused the movie, listening. The scratching continued, like chalk on a board. We looked at each other, fear creeping in. The kitchen door was closed. We argued over who would check. Finally, I got up, heart pounding, and went into the kitchen. I removed the towel. The board was filled with words now, sentences written over each other, hard to read. I caught phrases like, secrets, your turn, don't ignore me, tell the truth. My stomach tightened. I called everyone in. They saw it too. Some insisted it must be a hidden camera trick or some timed device. Others said the landlord must be messing with us. We searched the kitchen walls, the backside of the chalkboard, every corner of the room. We found nothing unusual, no mechanism, no hidden projector. We decided we had enough. We would leave. But it was late, raining hard outside, and most of us had been drinking. We agreed to go first thing in the morning. We locked the kitchen door, hoping that would do something. It felt pointless. In my room, I lay awake, listening for sounds. I heard nothing. In the morning, we packed our bags. We didn't bother making breakfast. We marched downstairs, intending to load the cars and leave. In the living room, we found something strange. A small piece of chalk lay on the coffee table. None of us left it there. In the kitchen, despite the locked door, the towel was on the floor, and the board had one new message: "You cannot escape." Someone cursed out loud. We all rushed to the front door. The door opened normally. The cars were where we left them. We started loading our things. But when we tried starting the cars, both refused to turn over. Dead batteries, maybe. It made no sense. They were fine yesterday. One guy checked under the hood. Everything looked normal. We tried jump-starting one car with the other. No luck. The nearest town was several miles away. Our phones had no signal out here, and the house's phone line was dead. We had noticed that the phone line was never working, but we assumed poor wiring. Now we were trapped. The landlord was supposed to return in 2 days. We couldn't wait that long with this madness going on. We decided to try walking back toward town. It was a long distance, but maybe we could find a farmhouse or a neighbor. 2 of us volunteered to go. They set off down the road. The rest of us stayed, wondering if we should pack food and follow them later. Inside, the chalkboard now said, 2 gone, 6 remain. We screamed at each other. Some blamed me, said I was calm and suspicious. Others accused the budget manager again. People shouted insults. Personal details nobody should know came out. We realized the board's messages revealed private information that caused mistrust. The atmosphere was hostile. We agreed to split up into 2 groups, one upstairs and one downstairs, to keep watch for anything weird. We didn't know what else to do. After a few hours, the 2 who left returned, soaking wet and exhausted. They said the road seemed endless, looping back. After walking for an hour, they found themselves near the house again. It made no sense. They tried going in another direction, cutting through fields, but ended up at the backyard. It was impossible, but it happened. Now everyone was scared. The board had new words. Your turn, confess. We yelled at the board, demanded an explanation. Nothing changed. One of us took a hammer and tried breaking the chalkboard. The hammer bounced off. The board didn't crack or chip. As night fell, we locked ourselves in the living room. We huddled together, a few of us armed with kitchen knives. We didn't know what we were fighting against. Around midnight, we heard the chalkboard squeaking again. Nobody wanted to check. The sound went on for minutes, driving us crazy. Finally, someone shouted that we had to face it. We unlocked the door and rushed in. The board said, "Your secrets are mine. Your lies are known. It's her turn next." We looked at the woman who handled the budget. She cried, saying she never lied, that it was the board making things up. Another teammate accused her of hiding expenses. She slapped him. Another person tried to calm them down, but failed. The group fell into chaos again. We decided to destroy the chalk. We found all pieces of chalk and smashed them into dust. Maybe no chalk, no writing. We left no chalk behind. In the morning, we found a new message, written in what looked like chalk anyway. Chalk is not needed. Someone tried wiping the board with water and detergent. The words reappeared, darker and bolder. We covered it with furniture, pushing a cabinet in front of it. We heard the scratching behind the cabinet. When we moved it, the board was covered in words again, layered on top of each other, impossible to read clearly. We started losing track of time. The food supply ran low. We ate canned goods and cereal bars. People slept in shifts. The board kept writing, predicting small arguments, revealing personal grudges, making us turn on each other. 2 of our colleagues got into a fistfight. Another locked herself in the bathroom, sobbing and refusing to come out. On what I think was the 4th day, the board wrote, "It's your turn. Confess and you may leave." We argued over who it meant. Everyone tried confessing something. One admitted stealing office supplies. Another admitted cheating on a partner. Another said they lied about sick days. We all confessed small or large sins, hoping to appease it. The board remained silent for a while. We sat in silence, waiting. Suddenly, the board wrote, "Not enough." We begged for mercy. We said we would do anything to get out. The board wrote, "You cannot escape." That same message repeated over and over, covering the entire surface. We shouted, cursed, cried. At some point, exhaustion took over. We fell asleep in the living room, piled together for comfort. When I woke up, the house was silent. I checked the board. Blank. I opened the door. The cars started fine. The sky was clear. I called the others. They woke up, rubbing their eyes, confused. We looked around. The board was empty, the house normal. Our phones had signal again. We could call the landlord, call for help, but it seemed unnecessary now. We packed our things quickly, afraid the nightmare would return. As we drove away, nobody spoke. The house got smaller in the rearview mirror. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see a message written in the air itself. We never figured out what happened. The landlord said the chalkboard was just a regular board. He never had complaints before. We didn't tell him the full story. We just said the retreat wasn't productive and left it at that. At the office, we avoid talking about it. We barely look each other in the eye. The team is fractured. We know each other's secrets now. We know we turned on each other under pressure. The trust we tried to build is gone. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see that chalkboard. I hear the scratching sound. I remember the words, "You cannot escape." We left the house, but the feeling remains. There's no chalkboard here at the office, no messages on walls. Still, I can't shake the sensation that we brought something back with us, something that knows what we hide, something that waits for the right moment to remind us again that secrets never stay buried for long. I moved into the apartment on a Monday morning. I had finished carrying all my boxes by late afternoon. The place looked ordinary enough. A narrow hall, a small living room, a bedroom in the back, and a kitchen off to the side. There was a long corridor on my floor, leading from the main entrance door to mine. A red carpet covered that corridor. It looked a bit old. The fibers were worn in some places, and the color had faded near the edges. There were no decorations on the walls, just some dim lamps spaced out along the way. My door was at the very end. On my first night, I unpacked a few items and then sat in the living room. I checked my phone. I listened to the faint hum of the refrigerator. The silence was heavy. The building was quiet. I guessed there were not many tenants, or maybe they were all at work. I had no complaints. I went to bed around midnight and slept fine. On the second morning, I woke up early. I opened my door to check the mail slot in the corridor. That was when I saw the footprints. They were on the red carpet, starting from the building's entrance door and stopping a few meters away. They looked like shoe prints, maybe from a heavy boot. I stepped closer and noticed they were very clear, like someone with dirty soles had walked through recently. They led toward my apartment door but did not reach it. They just stopped. I looked around. No one else was in the hall. I figured someone had come through late at night and then changed their mind. I left for work and tried not to think about it. But that evening, I checked again. The footprints were still there. They had not faded. I had expected the building's cleaner to remove them, but nothing changed. I went inside and had dinner. I watched some TV. Around midnight, I opened my door one last time to see if anything looked different. The footprints were the same. I locked up and went to sleep. On the third morning, I noticed something strange. The footprints seemed closer to my door than before. Previously, they ended a few meters away. Now they ended about a meter closer. I was sure of this. I had no way to prove it, but I was certain. The shape of the prints looked the same. They were large, about the size of a man's foot, but I could not see any brand or pattern. They were just dark smudges on the red carpet. I crouched down and touched the carpet. It felt dry. I sniffed the air. Nothing. I stood up and looked around again. The corridor was empty as always. That night, I decided to stay up late and watch the corridor through the peephole. I turned off all the lights in my apartment. I sat on a chair behind the door with my eye pressed against the peephole. I waited. My legs felt stiff. My eye got tired. I blinked a lot. I heard nothing. The corridor remained dim and still. After about 2 hours, I gave up. I checked the corridor before going to bed. The footprints had not changed. On the fourth morning, the footprints had moved again, now even closer to my door. They stopped about half a meter away. My heart beat faster. I did not like this. It made no sense. I had been awake most of the night. I had heard nothing. How could someone do this without a sound? I decided I needed more proof. I went to a hardware store after work and bought some white flour. That night, I spread the flour carefully over the corridor's carpet, all the way from the entrance door to my own. It formed a thin layer, enough to catch new footprints. I locked my door and turned off the lights. I sat near the door again. This time I did not stay up long. I was tired. After about an hour, I fell asleep on the couch. I woke up at dawn. I jumped up, grabbed my phone to check the time, and rushed to the door. I looked through the peephole. The corridor looked normal. I opened the door slowly. The flour was disturbed. I crouched and looked closely. I saw fresh footprints in the flour, but now I saw something else. The footprints started right outside my apartment door and led deeper into the corridor toward the entrance. They did not come from the entrance. They came from inside my apartment. This made my chest tighten. I felt my neck getting hot. My stomach felt heavy. I looked behind me. My apartment was small and quiet. No one was there. I knelt down and touched the prints. The flour stuck to my fingers. The footprints were small. They looked like bare feet, not boots. They belonged to someone who had no shoes on. The toes were clear. The heel shape was distinct. It looked like an adult's foot. I stood up and looked at my own bare foot. The mysterious footprints were smaller than mine. They looked like they belonged to someone else, maybe a woman or a smaller man. I had no idea. I wiped my hands on my pants and then went back inside. I locked the door and felt my heart pounding hard. I listened for any sound. Nothing. I opened all closets, looked under my bed, checked the bathroom and the shower. I found nothing. I tried to reason about this. Someone was entering my apartment without me noticing, or maybe they were never leaving. That thought made me sweat. I wiped my forehead. My hands shook a little. I decided I needed to stay awake the entire night. I prepared coffee. I sat in the dark, facing the door. I held a flashlight. I waited. I tried not to blink for too long. Around 2 a.m., I felt my eyes burning. I forced myself to stay alert. I listened carefully. I heard the refrigerator hum, the distant buzz of a streetlight outside, and my own breathing. I heard nothing else. At some point, I got up and walked quietly through each room again. I checked the kitchen cabinets, even inside the oven and the refrigerator. I checked under the sink. I checked all my boxes. Nothing. The place was empty except for my belongings. I left the lights off and stood in my bedroom doorway. I stared at my bed and my dresser. Everything looked normal. Then I heard a faint creak from the corridor. I rushed to the door and pressed my ear against it. Silence. I waited a few minutes. Nothing else happened. At dawn, I checked the corridor. The footprints had appeared again in the flour. This time, they were a bit closer to my door from the outside. They seemed to hover in place, leading away from my apartment. I tried to talk to the building manager that morning. He was an older man who spent most of his time in a small office near the lobby. I asked him if anyone else had complained about strange footprints. He shrugged. He said the carpet was old, and sometimes smudges appeared because of dust. I told him these were clear footprints. He said he would look into it. I doubted he would. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? Footprints on a carpet. Over the next few nights I tried several things. I set my phone to record video in the corridor. The next morning, the phone showed the corridor was empty the entire time. No movement, no person. Yet the footprints kept changing position slightly each night. I placed traps. I put a piece of tape on my door frame at floor level. In the morning, it was still in place, untouched. Whoever was making these footprints was not opening my door, or maybe I was dealing with something else entirely. I felt uneasy thinking that. My mouth went dry. My fingers felt cold. I could not sleep well. My eyes were always tired. My neck felt sore. My legs felt weak when I walked out into the corridor to check the footprints each morning. The footprints were always there. They never faded. They just changed slightly, as if someone was shifting their stance, moving an inch closer one day, an inch back another day. I tried to remove the footprints by cleaning the carpet. I rubbed it with a damp cloth. The prints faded a bit, but by the next morning, they looked the same as before. It was as if they never really left. Each time I tried to erase them, they returned. I started to feel trapped. I lived alone and had no one to talk to about this. The neighbors never seemed to be around. I left notes under a few doors asking if they had seen anything strange. No one replied. One night, I decided to barricade my door from the inside. I pushed a heavy shelf against it. I knew if anyone tried to open the door, I would hear it fall. Then I tried to sleep on the couch, facing the door. I kept a flashlight in my hand. At some point, I heard a soft sound. It was like a whisper, but I could not make out any words. I jumped up, turned on the flashlight, and listened. The air felt colder than before. My arms had goosebumps. I checked behind the couch, under the table, everywhere. Nothing. In the morning, I removed the shelf and opened the door. The footprints in the corridor had changed again. This time, there were more of them. It looked like not just one set, but two sets overlapping. One set pointed toward my door, and the other set pointed away from it. They were small, bare footprints. I bent down and looked at the toes. They were all spread out, like someone had pressed their feet firmly into the flour. But I had not laid any more flour since that first time, so why did it look fresh? I wiped my hand on the carpet. I saw a faint white powder on my fingers. It looked like flour, but I had cleaned that up days ago. I felt a dull pressure behind my eyes. I was tired. My body felt heavy. I wanted to leave this place, but I had just moved in. I could not just give up. I needed to figure this out. I decided to stay home from work one day and watch the corridor through my peephole all day long. I sat there with snacks and water. I kept my eye pressed against the hole, ignoring the discomfort. After hours, nothing happened. Around late afternoon, my legs hurt from sitting. I got up and walked around. When I checked again a few minutes later, the footprints had moved closer by a few centimeters. I had missed it. Whatever was doing this happened in moments. I looked away. I cursed under my breath. I felt sweat on my back. Later that night, I tried a different tactic. I placed a thin layer of flour right inside my apartment, just beyond the door. I made sure it was smooth and even. Then I sat in the dark again, facing the door. I kept my eyes wide open. I felt my heart thumping. After a few hours, I got drowsy. My eyes closed for a moment. When I jerked awake, I pointed my flashlight at the floor. There were footprints in the flour inside my apartment. They started a few meters behind me, near the kitchen, and led toward the door. But I had been sitting in front of the door the whole time. Nothing passed by me. I stood up and looked around the apartment. My breathing was fast. My hands were shaky. I felt a chill in my chest. There was nowhere to hide in here. It was a small apartment. I opened the closet. Empty. I opened every cupboard. Empty. I moved the couch. Nothing. I knelt down and checked under the bed. Nothing. I shouted, "Who's here?" My voice sounded weak. No answer. I slapped my own face lightly, trying to focus. I paced around the room. I tried not to think about impossible explanations. I stuck to what I saw. Footprints inside the apartment. No visible person. No sound. I stayed awake until morning, pacing the room, checking the footprints again and again. They never faded. They just stayed there. Eventually, I had to leave for a moment. I needed to use the bathroom. When I came back, I saw that the footprints had shifted slightly. Now they pointed inward, as if whoever made them had turned around inside the apartment. I realized something important. This thing never left. It never came from outside. It was always inside. It just moved from place to place. The corridor footprints were a trick. They never showed anyone entering. They always ended or started at my door, but the real start point was inside. That morning, as the sunlight came through the window, I tried to clean the flour inside. The footprints would not wipe away completely. A faint outline remained, no matter how hard I scrubbed. I gave up. I placed a chair in the center of the apartment and looked at the door, then at the floor, then at my bed. I listened carefully. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall ticked. My stomach growled. I felt a headache coming on. My arms were sore. I realized there was no way to keep this thing out, because it was never out. It was here all along. It moved silently, leaving no clues except these footprints. I would never see it. I would never hear it. But it was here. It could stand behind me when I slept. It could watch me from the dark corners. I felt my legs trembling. My mouth was dry. I took a deep breath and decided that I had to accept it. I had to live here, and it was here too. For the next few days, I tried to ignore the footprints. They changed positions each night. Sometimes they were near the kitchen, sometimes near the bathroom door, sometimes they were right next to my bed. When I woke up, I found them in new places, always clear, always solid. I never saw them appear. I never heard a sound. I stopped trying to catch it. I stopped spreading flour. I tried to live my life, but I slept with the lights on. I locked the door and double-checked my windows every night. I talked to no one. I ate simple meals. I avoided walking too fast, worried I might bump into something invisible. My body stayed tense all day. My neck hurt. My jaw felt tight. Sometimes I woke up sweating. Sometimes I woke up and saw footprints by my bed, facing me. I tried not to look for long. Nothing else happened. There were no attacks, no objects moving by themselves, only footprints that shifted positions each night. I understood the truth. There was something in my apartment that never left. It just moved around. It stayed silent. It watched me live. It never revealed itself. except through these footprints. I never learned what it was. I never learned why it chose my apartment. I only learned to accept that I was never alone. I moved into that old house at the end of a quiet street. I did it on a weekday morning. The place smelled stale. The paint on the walls was chipped. The floors creaked. I placed my boxes in the living room and walked around. There was a single piece of furniture left behind by the previous owners, a small wooden shelf by the front window. On that shelf stood an old radio. It looked heavy and scratched. I saw no brand name. The dials were worn, and the speaker had a brownish fabric cover. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. I had other things to do. That evening, after I unpacked my bed and a few kitchen items, I sat in the living room. It was quiet outside. There were no cars passing. The lights in the house were dim. I heard the old wood beams cracking in the ceiling. I looked at the radio. It was off. I had tried its dial once earlier. It produced only static. I assumed it didn't work. I left it alone and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up around 7. I heard a voice in the distance. It sounded muffled. I walked into the living room. The radio was on. A man's voice spoke softly, describing a scene that sounded familiar. He mentioned someone unpacking dishes in a kitchen. I realized he was describing me, the exact actions I took the night before. I stood there, staring at the radio. I could see the dials turning on their own. I didn't touch anything. I reached for the knob and tried to turn it off. It crackled, but the voice continued. The voice had no accent. It sounded calm, but distant. After a moment, the voice faded into static. I felt a chill on my arms. The hair on my neck stood up. I stepped back and eyed the living room windows. They were shut. Outside, a few birds chirped. Inside, the radio was now silent. I tried to ignore it. I got dressed and left for work. All day I thought about that voice. Was it a broadcast? A coincidence? Maybe I had misheard. That night I came home and checked the radio again. It was off. I sat on the couch, ate a sandwich, and listened carefully. Nothing happened. I fell asleep on the couch, waking up after midnight. The radio was still silent. On the second morning, I woke to the sound of static. I hurried to the living room. The radio played a woman's voice this time. She described my evening, how I fell asleep on the couch, how I had eaten a sandwich and left crumbs on the coffee table. I glanced down. There were crumbs where I had sat. I felt my chest tighten. My breathing got shallow. I tried the knob again. The voice stopped immediately. I pulled the plug from the wall. The radio went dark. I left for work, feeling uneasy. That evening, I returned and found the radio plugged in again. I remembered pulling it out. I checked the outlet. The radio's plug was firmly inserted. My stomach twisted. I pulled it out again, harder this time, and placed the radio under the coffee table. I left it there. I made some dinner, turned on the TV to distract myself, and eventually went to bed. On the third morning, I heard voices before I even got out of bed. I rushed to the living room. The radio was back on the shelf. It was plugged in, switched on, and the man's voice described me sleeping uneasily. He mentioned how I tossed and turned. He said I had dreams I wouldn't remember. I had dreamed something vague, something that made me sweat. I reached over and pulled the plug. The voice vanished. I didn't know what to think. I felt my forehead. It was damp. I rubbed my hands together. I decided to leave the house immediately. I would go to work early. I would ignore this problem for now. Over the following days, the pattern continued. Each morning, at around sunrise, the radio turned on by itself. Each time, The voice, sometimes male, sometimes female, described my previous day's actions. It described things no one else could have known. It mentioned me checking my phone alone in the bathroom. It mentioned how I whispered curses to myself when I bumped my knee on the coffee table. I never saw anyone tamper with the radio. The doors stayed locked. The windows were closed. I tried to get rid of it. One afternoon, I took the radio and placed it in a box. I drove out of town and dropped it off at a roadside dumpster. I returned home feeling relieved. I even smiled a bit. That night, I slept better. The next morning, I woke up and went to the living room. The radio was back on the shelf. My hands shook. I breathed heavily. I kicked the coffee table in frustration. I pulled the plug out and tossed the radio on the floor. It hit the floor with a dull thud. The casing cracked. I saw some old wires inside. I left it there. The next morning the radio was restored. No crack, no damage. It sat on the shelf, plugged in, as if nothing had happened. The voice came again, calm and steady. It mentioned my attempt to get rid of it. It said I had driven on a certain highway, describing the scenery I passed. I felt my throat tighten. My heart beat fast. I looked around the house. No cameras, no devices, just this old radio. I tried smashing it with a hammer. I brought the hammer down hard on the top. Sparks flew. I pulled out some wires. I ripped the dial off. I threw everything into a garbage bag and put the bag in my trunk. I drove it far away and buried it in a shallow hole near a forest trail. I felt silly doing this, but I had no other idea. I returned home late at night, exhausted. The next morning I woke to static. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I found the radio on the shelf, intact. The voice played again, describing everything I had done with the hammer, the bag, and the burial. It said I should stop trying. I stood there, fists clenched. My body felt hot. My forehead was sweaty. I said nothing. Eventually, the voice ended, and I pulled the plug. I paced around the living room, mumbling curses. I didn't know what else to do. The next few days were the worst. The radio started not only describing my past actions, but mentioning things I would do in the future. At first, it was small details like, "Later, you will spill your coffee," or "You'll forget your keys before leaving." And these things happened exactly as described. I spilled my coffee at work an hour after hearing the message. I forgot my keys in the morning after another message. My face burned each time I realized the voice was right. My legs felt weak. My hands trembled. As time passed, the radio revealed more personal details. It mentioned secrets I had never told anyone. It described my thoughts during private moments. It said which items in the house I touched last. It mentioned the names of friends I had not spoken to in years. It spoke about my childhood home, describing it accurately. I paced around the house, checking every corner, but I found nothing out of place. I tried wearing earplugs at night, hoping not to hear the radio, but it didn't matter. Each morning I woke up and eventually checked the living room. The voice always said what had happened, what would happen, and what I was thinking. It began to make subtle suggestions. "You won't call your friend tonight, even though you planned to." I tried to call my friend, but my phone died suddenly. "You will break a glass today." I tried to be careful, but I knocked a glass off the counter by accident. My stomach churned. I felt nauseous sometimes. I lost my appetite. I felt watched every second. At night, I barely slept. I sat in bed listening. Once, around midnight, the radio turned on by itself. The voice whispered that I was not alone in the room. I jumped up, turned on the lights, and found nothing. My body shook. My heart pounded. I tried to calm myself by opening a window. Outside, the The street was empty, just the sound of distant cars and the wind. The next morning the radio said, "Now you understand." I did not know what I understood. I just knew I couldn't escape it. It described my fears, said I was scared and tired. It told me I would not go to work today, and it was right. I stayed home, too afraid and drained to leave. I sat on the couch, staring at the radio. I touched the shelves, felt the old wood. The radio hummed with a faint static sound, even though it was unplugged now. I had stopped trying to unplug it. It made no difference. Then it started telling me things I had never done, but I would end up doing. It said I would move the couch to the other side of the room. I swore I wouldn't. But a few hours later, I moved it when I dropped my keys behind it, trying to retrieve them. The radio said I would cut my finger while chopping vegetables. I decided not to cook, but later I got hungry and tried to prepare something simple. I slipped and cut my finger on the knife. My hand throbbed. Blood dripped on the countertop. I cursed and pressed a towel against it. The worst part came one morning when the voice said, "Tonight you will speak to me." I froze. I stared at the radio, my mind racing. I didn't know what that meant. Speak to it how? I never spoke back. I avoided it. I treated it like an object. But now it was telling me that I would talk. I clenched my jaw. I decided to resist. I spent the whole day in silence. I didn't even call anyone. I made no noise. I tried to go to bed early, hoping to sleep through it. Around midnight, I heard a faint hum. The radio turned on. The voice was softer now, barely above a whisper. It said, "It's your turn to talk." I sat in bed, breathing hard. My chest felt tight. My mouth was dry. I shook my head and closed my eyes. The voice repeated, "Now it's your turn." I pulled the blanket over my head. I heard static crackle. The house felt cold. My skin got goosebumps. I got up, walked into the living room, and stood in front of the shelf. The radio's dial moved slowly. The voice said, "Speak." I swallowed. My throat hurt. My legs were stiff. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave the house forever. But I stood there, staring at the radio's speaker. I saw a faint light behind the fabric. Was it my imagination? I leaned forward. The voice said nothing else, just static. I spoke quietly. "What do you want?" The radio hissed, then went silent. I felt my heart pounding in my ears. I tried again. "Who are you?" No response, just a low hum. I waited, shaking. After a few minutes, I turned away. Then I heard the voice again, calm and steady. Good. Just that word. I turned around and saw the dial twitch. I asked again, louder this time, "Who are you?" The voice said nothing. I felt a surge of anger. My hands balled into fists. I leaned closer and spoke slowly. "Leave me alone." The voice crackled, then faded. The radio went silent. The static stopped. The house grew quiet. I stood there, breathing heavily. I waited for something else to happen. Nothing did. I touched the radio. It was cool to the touch. I checked the plug. It was still unplugged. I picked it up and shook it gently. No sound. I placed it back on the shelf. I went to bed but didn't sleep well. I kept opening my eyes, expecting to hear the voice again. The next morning I got up. The radio was there, silent. I approached it and listened. Nothing. I flipped the knob, just static. I checked every detail. It looked old and worn. I waited for the voice. It did not come. I went to work. I thought about the conversation. I had asked it to leave me alone. It had said good after I spoke. When I returned that evening, the radio was still silent. I tried turning it on. Static. No voice. Days passed. It stayed quiet. I ate in silence, slept in silence. I waited each morning, expecting to hear my life narrated, but there was nothing. The radio did not move. It did not appear in strange places. It stayed right where I left it. I dusted the shelf. I cleaned the coffee table. I sat on the couch and watched the front window. Nothing happened. A week went by, then 2. The radio remained silent. I touched its dial occasionally, but only static came through. No voices, no messages, no predictions. My routine returned to normal. I went to work on time, ate at home, watched some TV. I tried not to think about the strange experience. Sometimes I woke up at dawn and listened carefully for any hum. I heard none. I considered getting rid of it again, but I decided not to. I left it on the shelf, like a broken piece of decoration. Maybe it had finished whatever it had wanted to do. Maybe it was satisfied after hearing me speak. I didn't understand it. I didn't want to understand it. I only cared that the voice was gone. Over time, I stopped feeling tense. My appetite returned. I stopped waking up early to check the radio. I began to ignore it. It became just another piece of old junk in the house. But sometimes, late at night, I thought I heard a faint crackle. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, waiting to hear the voice again. But there was nothing, just the house settling, the wind outside, and my own breathing in the dark. I first noticed the extra button in the elevator panel on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember the time clearly. It was around 3 p.m. I had finished a meeting on the 10th floor and stepped into the elevator alone. The building was a regular office tower downtown, a place I had visited many times. There were the usual floor numbers, from ground up to 13, although the 13th was just a maintenance area and storage. But that day, I saw a button I had never seen before. It sat between floors 6 and 7, a small, worn button labeled with a number I couldn't read properly. It looked like a smudge or a faded number. I squinted at it, trying to figure it out, but it made no sense. I pressed it without thinking too much. The elevator doors closed and the ride felt longer than usual. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling flickered once or twice. My stomach felt a bit uneasy, like going down a roller coaster, even though I was going up. After a few seconds, the doors opened onto a floor I didn't recognize. The hallway was dimly lit. I saw some old office doors along a corridor. The paint on the walls was peeling. There was a faint smell of dust and stale air. It felt colder than the rest of the building. I stepped out of the elevator. I heard my shoes scrape on the old carpeting. The corridor stretched in both directions. I knew this was wrong. The building's layout was familiar to me. There was no such floor. I walked forward a few steps. I listened carefully. There was no humming of computers, no distant phones ringing. No voices, just quiet. The lights flickered overhead, making a slight buzzing sound. I glanced back at the elevator. It was still open. The inside looked normal, but the panel seemed different. I couldn't see the ground floor button anymore. I felt uneasy. My chest tightened. I decided to go back inside and return to the lobby. I stepped into the elevator and looked at the panel. The buttons were rearranged. The ground floor button was gone. There were only a few numbers, 1, 2, 5, 11, and something else faded. No button for my current floor. No button for the lobby. I tried pressing the lowest number available. Maybe I could get back down that way. Nothing happened. The elevator doors stayed open. I pressed the close doors button. It clicked, but the doors didn't move. I tapped it again, harder. Still nothing. I stepped back out into the corridor. I listened again. Still nothing. I walked down the hall, checking the doors. Most were locked. I saw old office names printed on glass panels. Anderson and Co., Miller Imports, Room 314. None of these names were familiar. The offices looked dark inside. I tried a door. It was locked. I knocked lightly. No response. I tried another door, locked as well. I began to feel trapped. My throat felt dry. I clenched my jaw and breathed slowly through my nose. I decided to find a stairwell. Every floor had a stairwell somewhere. I turned a corner and found a metal door with a small window. It looked like a fire exit. I pushed it open. It led to a stairwell that smelled musty. I looked up and down the concrete steps. No signs, no exit markings. I walked down a few steps and tried a door leading onto what should have been another floor. When I pushed it open, I ended up in the same corridor I had just left. The same peeling paint, the same flickering lights. I let the door close behind me. I tried going up the stairs instead. After a few flights, I found another door. I opened it and again stepped into the same hallway. I felt sweat forming on my forehead. My hands felt colder. I tried not to panic. I tested another door. Same result. Every door from the stairwell led back to the same floor, the same corridor. It was like a loop. I stepped back into the corridor and looked for any sign or window. The windows at the end of the hall were covered by dusty blinds. I pulled one aside and saw nothing but darkness. No city lights, no sky, no buildings, just blackness. I could see my own reflection in the glass. My face looked pale and tense. I walked further, passing empty offices. I noticed something on the floor near one door, a small keychain. I picked it up. It had a logo of a sports team I liked, and it looked familiar. I remembered losing a keychain like this years ago. I stared at it, feeling a chill run down my spine. Why was it here? I dropped it and backed away. I tried another door. This time, the knob turned, and I entered a small office room. Inside, there was a desk, a chair, and a dusty file cabinet. The air smelled stale and old. On the desk, I saw a pen and a piece of paper. The pen looked like one I used to own, a cheap plastic pen I had lost months ago. My heart thumped harder in my chest. I touched the desk surface. The dust left marks on my fingertips. My breathing got faster. I stepped back out into the hallway, my legs feeling weak. I decided to keep moving. Maybe there was another elevator or a phone. I looked around for a telephone on the walls. Older buildings sometimes had emergency phones. I found a small panel behind a glass door. It looked like an old intercom or fire phone. I lifted the receiver, but it was dead, no dial tone. I placed it back, trying to keep my hands steady. I walked more, feeling the tension in my shoulders. The corridor seemed longer than before. I didn't remember it being so long. The lights flickered. I heard a faint sound, like distant voices murmuring. I froze and listened. The sound came from behind a door labeled storage. I tried the handle. It turned, but the door creaked and opened onto a dark room. I smelled mold. I stepped inside, holding my breath. I heard whispering now. I couldn't make out words. I reached for the light switch. The ceiling lamp blinked on weakly. The room was empty except for a few boxes. No one inside. The whispering stopped. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. I backed out of the room slowly. Out in the corridor, I tried to stay calm. I clenched and unclenched my fists. I told myself to keep moving. I turned a corner and saw the elevator again. It stood there at the end of the hall, doors open. I hadn't heard it move. I walked towards it, noticing something different. The panel inside the elevator now had fewer buttons, just one button that was completely blank, and one labeled with a distorted symbol. I pressed the blank button. Nothing happened. I pressed the symbol button. The doors slid closed slowly. The elevator began to move. I felt a strange pressure in my ears. It stopped with a jolt. The doors opened onto the same corridor again. But now some of the doors were open. I could see into the offices. They were empty, but I noticed my old backpack sitting on a chair inside one office. A backpack I had lost years ago while traveling. I grabbed it. It felt real. I checked inside. It was empty, but I recognized a stain on the fabric. This made my heart pound. I dropped the backpack and ran back to the elevator. The doors stayed open this time. I pressed all the buttons, hoping something would happen. Nothing did. I stepped out again. I felt lightheaded. I needed a way out. I thought about breaking a window. I found a fire extinguisher on the wall. I lifted it. It felt heavy. I approached a window and swung the extinguisher at the glass. The glass cracked but didn't break fully. I hit it again. The glass shattered, and a rush of cold air hit my face. I looked outside. There was no street, no building, just darkness, a deep, endless darkness. I felt a rush of panic. I stepped back. There was nowhere to go out there. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. The battery icon blinked. It would die soon. I tried calling emergency services anyway. No sound, no connection. I put the phone back in my pocket. I inhaled and exhaled, trying to steady my nerves. The corridor seemed different each time I looked. Doors changed positions. Some lights stopped working, leaving sections dark. I tried the stairwell again, running up and down the steps, opening door after door, always ending up in the same place. My calves ached. My throat felt raw from breathing dust. My palms sweated. I saw something move at the end of the hall, a shadow shifting. I hurried towards it, calling out, "Hello?" My voice echoed. No reply, just the sound of my footsteps on the worn carpet. I reached the end of the corridor. Nothing there, just an old chair in the corner and a broken lamp on the floor. Time felt strange. I had no idea how long I had been here. Hours, maybe. I was hungry and thirsty. I found a water cooler in one office. The bottle was half empty. I tasted the water. It was stale but drinkable. I drank a few cups. My stomach rumbled. I opened drawers hoping to find something edible. Nothing but dusty papers and old pens. I returned to the elevator one more time. The doors were closed now. I pressed the call button. The doors opened slowly, revealing a different interior. The walls were scratched. The floor mat was dirty. The panel had only one button now, a blank button. I pressed it, hoping it would take me somewhere else. The elevator doors closed, and I felt it move. It moved longer this time, humming and rattling. My ears popped again. I held onto the railing, my heart racing. When the doors opened, I saw a dimly lit corridor that looked slightly different. The paint color was off-white instead of yellowish. I stepped out. I recognized a sign on the wall. It was the building's directory, but it was old and out of date. I saw some company names I knew had left years ago. I tried the stairwell here. I opened it and climbed down 3 flights. I tried a door. This time the door opened onto a different hallway. I saw a familiar vending machine. I remembered this vending machine from a few weeks ago, on a lower floor of the building. I checked it. It was empty, just a shell. But the placement felt right. Maybe I was closer to escaping. I found another elevator at the end of this new hallway. It looked newer, with a polished panel. I pressed the button for the ground floor. Nothing happened. I pressed it again. The elevator jerked downward suddenly. I gripped the handrail, my heart pounding. I watched the floor indicator. 9, 8, 7, 6. It skipped some numbers. It went blank at one point. Then it stopped. The doors opened onto a lobby. It looked like the building's lobby. but the lights were off. Outside, I could see the streetlights through the glass entrance doors. I could see cars parked outside, empty sidewalks. I ran to the door and pushed. It was locked. I searched the security desk for keys. Nothing. I tapped on the glass. I saw my reflection, and behind it, faint headlights of a car passing by. I banged on the glass, yelling. The sound echoed. Then I heard a ding behind me. I turned. The elevator doors had closed. The panel next to them had changed. I pulled on the front doors again. This time they opened easily. A gust of cool night air hit me. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. I looked back at the building. The lobby lights flickered on suddenly. I checked the address above the entrance. It was correct. I turned around to see if anyone was nearby. A couple of distant figures walked along the opposite side of the street. Everything looked normal now. I stood there, breathing deeply. My legs felt weak, so I sat on the curb. I checked my phone. The time seemed off by a couple of hours compared to what I expected. I tried to piece it together. I looked up at the building's windows. They looked normal. No strange floors, just a regular building. I never figured out what happened. The next day, I came back to the building for another meeting. I took the same elevator. The panel looked normal, with floors clearly labeled. No extra button, no strange, faded number. I went to the 10th floor without any issues. The corridor was bright and modern. I finished my meeting and left as quickly as possible. I didn't linger or explore. I avoided the stairwell. I didn't want to try my luck. I keep thinking about the objects I found, my old keychain, my old backpack. They're not with me now. I left them behind. I never told anyone about it. I know it happened. I remember the cold air, the dusty smell, the endless hallway. I remember the silence and the whispering voices. I remember the darkness outside the window. Now, when I enter any elevator, I check the panel carefully. I never press unfamiliar buttons. I never stay inside alone for too long. If I ever see a strange floor again, I won't step out. I can't go through that again. I noticed the key on my desk on a Wednesday morning. I remember the time because I had just sat down with a cup of coffee, and the office was quiet. It was early, maybe around 8:15 a.m. before most people arrived. I saw this small metal key near my keyboard. It had no label or tag. It looked old, with a dull gray finish. It wasn't mine. I kept my desk neat. I knew every item on it. Pens in a holder, a notepad, my phone, a few documents. This key didn't belong there. I picked it up. It felt cool and a bit rough along the edges. I turned it in my hand, looking for any mark or letter. Nothing. I glanced around. The office was half lit. No one else was at their desks yet. The cleaning staff might have passed by, but I doubted they would leave a key. I stood up and checked the floor around my desk chair. Maybe it fell from somewhere. Nothing there. I leaned over my partition and looked around. Empty workstations, silent phones, just the gentle hum of the air conditioning. I placed the key inside my top drawer. I decided I would ask around later. Maybe someone lost it. I tried to forget about it and start working. Emails, reports, scheduling meetings. But I kept thinking about that key. It was strange. At lunch, I asked a few colleagues if they lost a key. They shook their heads. One joked that maybe it was the key to my promotion. I didn't laugh much. I just shrugged and said I found it on my desk. That afternoon, I took the key to the reception desk. I told the receptionist that I found it and asked if anyone had reported missing keys. She said no. She took it and put it in a small lost and found box. I went back to my desk and tried to get on with my day. The next morning, I arrived at the office at the same time. I turned on my computer, sipped my coffee, and looked at my desk. The key was there again. It was in a different spot this time, sitting near my stapler. I froze. I knew I left it at reception. My stomach tightened. I looked around again, a bit more nervous now. A few colleagues had arrived. I asked one if she placed a key on my desk. She said no, looking confused. I decided not to push it. I picked up the key and checked it again. Same dull metal, same blank surface. I walked to reception. The receptionist looked at me puzzled. She said she still had the key in the lost and found box, untouched. She opened it to show me. Indeed, there was a key inside, identical to mine. Now I had 2 identical keys. My skin prickled. I felt a little off, like something wasn't right. I placed the second key in the lost and found as well. Now there were 2 identical keys in that box. I made sure the receptionist closed it. I returned to my desk, feeling uneasy. I tried to focus on work. Later that day, I checked the box. Both keys were still there. I relaxed a bit. Maybe I imagined something. Maybe I found a similar key. I told myself to stop worrying. The next morning, Friday, I arrived a bit later, around 9 a.m. I felt more relaxed. I sat down, turned on my monitor, and there it was again. The key. Just one key, resting in the center of my desk this time. I stood up abruptly, knocking my chair back. My heart rate went up. I walked straight to reception. The receptionist looked surprised. She opened the box. It was empty. No keys at all now. I said nothing. I just walked back slowly. I felt my arms tense. My breathing got shallower. I sat down and stared at the key. I picked it up and put it in my bag. I zipped the bag and placed it under my desk. Maybe I would take it home and throw it away. As the day went on, I tried to ignore it. In the evening, I took the bag and left. On my way home, I stopped by a small park with a trash bin. I took the key out and tossed it into the bin. I watched it land on some coffee cups and wrappers. I left, trying not to think about it. That night, I had a strange dream. I saw a long corridor with gray walls. Dim lights spaced evenly, a few doors along the sides. At the end of the corridor, one door stood slightly open, showing a warm light inside. I remember walking closer in the dream, but I woke up before I could see what was behind that door. I felt anxious for some reason. It was just a dream, though. On Monday morning, I walked into the office feeling rested but still a bit uneasy. I sat down, booted my computer, and opened my bag. The key was there, lying on top of my documents. I pulled it out slowly. My throat felt dry. How could it be here? I threw it away in a park far from the office. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Still there. I felt sweat on my back. My hands got clammy. I placed the key on my desk and looked around, hoping someone would explain this joke. No one seemed to notice. Everyone typed away on their keyboards, talking about the weekend. I didn't say anything. I just put the key back in my bag. The rest of the day, I tried to forget about it. At lunch, I didn't mention it to anyone. I just ate quietly and returned to my desk. Around 4 p.m., I took a break and walked to the elevator. I planned to go downstairs and get some fresh air. When I stepped out of the elevator on the ground floor, something felt wrong. I wasn't in the building's lobby. I was in a corridor, the same corridor from my dream. Gray walls, dim lights, evenly spaced doors. It didn't match my building at all. I froze. I pressed the elevator button to go back up. The doors closed and opened again, showing me the same corridor. I stepped out, heart pounding. I felt a chill down my arms. The air smelled stale. I looked at the doors. They were all closed and identical, except for one at the end, slightly open with a warm light inside. My bag felt heavy on my shoulder. I reached inside and touched the key. It was still there, cool against my fingers. I walked down the corridor, my footsteps echoing softly. The silence was total, no voices, no hum of ventilation, just my breathing. My mouth was dry. I approached the door at the end. It was an old wooden door with a simple knob. The light inside looked like a lamp glow. I pushed it gently. The door opened, revealing a small room. Inside, I saw a desk, a chair, and something else. Another me sitting behind the desk. She looked exactly like me, same clothes, same face. She stared at me with a blank expression. I stumbled backward, gasping. My heart hammered in my chest. My legs felt weak. I tried to speak, but no words came out. The other me stood up slowly. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me, tilting her head slightly. I saw her eyes blink. I heard my own breathing, fast and uneven. The room smelled of dust. The desk looked old and had a single drawer. I looked at her hands. They were empty. Then I looked at the door. It had a lock. I remembered the key in my bag. My hand shook as I pulled it out. The key felt heavier than before. I tried to fit it into the door's lock. It slid in smoothly, turning with a click. The other me watched quietly, not reacting. I stepped inside, keeping my distance. The room felt warmer than the corridor. The silence pressed on my ears. I said, "Who are you?" My voice sounded thin and strained. The other me just stood there, breathing quietly. She had no distinct smell, no movement, except for slow blinking. I waved a hand in front of her face. She didn't flinch. I felt my stomach churn. This was impossible. I stepped back, my legs trembling. I considered running. But where? The corridor behind me offered no escape, just that strange elevator that brought me here. I tried the drawer in the desk. Inside, I found a folded piece of paper. I opened it. It was blank. I touched my face and rubbed my eyes. This felt like a nightmare, but I was awake. I backed out of the room, key in hand. I left the door open. The other me just stood there, watching. I didn't understand. I returned to the elevator and pressed the button again. The doors opened onto my office's lobby this time, just as it should. I stepped out, my head spinning. I looked around. People passed by carrying folders, talking on phones. Everything normal. I glanced at my watch. Only a few minutes had passed. I rushed to my desk and checked my bag. The key was still there. I pulled it out and placed it on my desk. It looked the same, dull and old. I touched my face, feeling sweat. My clothes were damp under my arms. I grabbed the key and ran to the restroom. I locked myself in a stall and looked at the key under the fluorescent light. Just a normal key. I tried bending it. It wouldn't bend. I thought of throwing it away again, but what if it returned? My mind raced. The corridor, the door, the copy of me. I couldn't ignore this. I needed to see if it would happen again. I left the restroom and headed to the elevator. My heart thudded in my chest. I pressed the ground floor button. The doors opened. The lobby was there, normal and bright. I tried other floors, just normal office floors, no strange corridor. After a few attempts, I gave up and returned to my desk. I left work early that day. At home, I placed the key in a small box and locked it inside my closet. I ate dinner without appetite and went to bed early, hoping to sleep. That night, I dreamed again about the corridor. This time, I stood at the open door, looking in. The other me waved at me. I woke up with a jolt, heart racing. In the morning, I checked the closet. The box was empty. The key was on my kitchen table. I didn't recall placing it there. I felt tears welling up. I was scared. I picked up the key and put it in my purse. I decided to try something else. Instead of throwing it away, I would keep it with me. At work, I avoided the elevator. I took the stairs. The day passed slowly. I kept checking my purse. The key was still there. In the late afternoon, I felt a strange pull. I stood up and walked to the elevator. I pressed the ground floor button. When the doors opened, I saw the corridor again. Dim lights, gray walls, the same doors. I took a deep breath, stepped out, and walked straight to the door at the end. Inside, the other me sat at the desk. This time, she smiled. It was a faint smile, but I saw it. She reached out her hand. I backed away, shaking my head. She pointed to the desk drawer. I opened it again. This time, the blank paper had words on it. It said, "You are ready." Ready for what? I looked at her. She nodded slowly. My hands shook. I felt my skin crawl. I wanted to leave. I held up the key. She stepped closer. I felt I should give it to her. I placed it on the desk. She picked it up and put it in her pocket. Then she stepped aside, and behind her, I saw a mirror on the wall. My reflection looked normal. I looked tired and pale, but normal. I turned to leave. She didn't stop me. I walked back to the corridor and took the elevator. The doors opened onto my normal lobby. I stood there, heart pounding. I checked my purse. No key. I smiled, shaky but relieved. Maybe it was over. The next day I arrived at my desk. No key. Everything looked normal. I worked as usual. At lunch I went to reception and asked if anyone returned a key. The receptionist said no. I felt lighter. I had no strange dreams that night. A week passed. No key. No corridor. I tried the elevator a few times, all normal floors. I started to relax. It seemed that by giving the key back to that other version of me, I had ended whatever was happening. I never told anyone about it. Who would believe me? The only trace left was a faint memory of that corridor, the stale smell, the flickering lights, and the other me standing behind that old desk. But the key was gone. My desk was clean. My dreams returned to normal. I moved on, pretending it never happened. But sometimes, when I ride the elevator late in the day, I feel a small chill in my spine. I glance at the floor buttons carefully, half expecting to find something strange. I never do. The key never came back, and I never saw that other me again.